for policymakers, and it provides a holistic way how to address different challenges. Today, we will explore a thematic action plan on new geographies. And this thematic action plan is looking at different types of geographies. You may call them non-standard, but mostly they're emerging due to the recent trends, global trends, and local trends as well. The main aim of the thematic action plan is to develop different types of analysis on development trends and the governance solutions applied in these geographies. And probably what is unique here is distinguishing this from different other efforts is that we have strived to create a platform for providing new innovative territorial data and a platform for discussion. And in this way, we will explore the notion of functional territories probably in a new light. Now the aim in the next 3 hours or so is to discuss the first research findings of our thematic action plan together with our researchers and involved stakeholders. And one session is going to be dedicated specifically to the research outcomes. And during the other session, we will look how this applies to the policy context, and we'll have a discussion with our stakeholders. I'm pretty sure that you have noticed this tantalizing word new in the title of the event. What is old, what is new, I'll let you discover during the event. So there will be plenty of opportunities to interact, so I invite you to ask questions as well. So I do hope you enjoy the session, and stay tuned for our next online events. One is already taking place on the 6th of May, and it will be dedicated to climate neutral territories. Now I would like to introduce our moderator, Erik Glorsen, who is going to lead the discussion today. Erik is head of Paris office of the Spatial Foresight. He is himself a researcher with plenty of experience on territorial issues, working in the past in the University of Geneva and Nordigio, and he also happens to be lead expert of one of our ESPON projects on new geographies. So now to you, Erik.
Thank you very much, Zintis, and warm welcome also from my side to this event. To me, this is really at the heart of what ESPON is about. We're talking about how well-designed, collaborative territorial approaches can help solve the key challenges we are confronted to, such as climate change adaptation, such as transformation of our industries to make them more green, more digital, such as preserving biodiversity, a lot of very big topics. I'm not sure we're going to be able to solve everything in one morning, but we have 3 hours together this morning, so I think we can still go into in-depth discussions. We'll have in-depth discussion here on the set with the panels. We have in-depth discussion involving you as an audience, being able to bring in your inputs. I'll be getting back to that in a few minutes, but very rich and policy relevant then components of this analysis today. What we'll be doing is really taking stock of different ESPON reports or projects. We have one pan-European study on how governance of these new geographies have been developing, what frameworks exist for it, what kind of trends we can see at the levels when we approach Europe from a perspective of new geographies. And then we have 3 targeted analyses, respectively working on the Alpine space, on the Atlantic region, and on the Carpathian region. So different perspectives, complementary perspectives, which will then provide the basis for a rich discussion, I'm sure. What we'd like to look at with our project stakeholders is how functional areas and new geographies can shape our understanding of how governance could be organized, how we can be more effective in policy design, how policies can become more collaborative. We'll focus more specifically on the interplay between soft and hard governance arrangements. And in relation to this, building on these notions, how these notions can help to build a combination of policy arrangement that is more effective. As Zintis mentioned, we will organize this event this morning in 2 sessions. The first one is then with building well our research results. We will be introducing new geographies from the Nostalgia project together with Giancarlo Cotella, I'll introduce in a second. We will be looking at challenges, opportunities, specificities with respect to flows, interlinkages, ecological fragmentation in the three spaces that I've mentioned. And this will be leading to a discussion on the added value of macro-regional strategies when addressing these functional interdependencies. How can macro-regional strategies be the game changer in developing effective approaches to functional territories? The second session later this morning will involve stakeholders from these three areas, from the three macro-regional strategies or initiatives. We will be looking at what type of evidence they need to inform ongoing policy processes. We will ask them about governance solutions that they consider most promising, also considering multi-level governance solutions, so this coordination between different levels of governance. We'd like to ask our stakeholders if they have examples of good practice they would like to highlight in this relation between the macro-regional level and the functional areas. And then together with you, audience, explore the policy priorities they would like to identify in relation to emerging geographies. As I briefly mentioned, this is an interactive workshop. You will have access to a Slido. I think the technical team will now give you the QR code to the Slido, which you can access in two ways. I encourage you either to just scan the code that appears now on the screen and use your mobile phone to submit questions. If your mobile phone is just not readily at hand, you can also just go on slido.com and type ESPON on the hashtag. You'll get a field where you can type ESPON, and then you also have access to the Slido through your computer. So different ways of accessing Slido. It is open throughout the entire event, so please feel free to submit your comments, questions at any time. And also, when you see questions, comments popping up on the Slido screen, you can vote for them. If you think something is very relevant, if you'd like really this question to be submitted to us here on the set, you can also vote for it to convey to us the importance you associate to specific points that's being raised. I'm joined today by a series of eminent speakers. I would like to do an introduction round. To my left, I have Katarzyna Wojnar, who is assistant professor at Euroreg University of Warsaw. She has a PhD in earth sciences and a strong interdisciplinary background. Dr. Wojnar is a leading researcher in urban studies. She has worked on co-working spaces, on spatial dynamics, on urban resilience, and she's here in her capacity of project leader for ESPON Carpat project. She has also been the ESPON contact point for a number of years, 2007, 2014, so a long established track record in ESPON. And her work bridges economic geography, public policy, innovation, and we're thrilled to have her insights on Carpathian cooperation today. Welcome. We also have Alexandre Almeida with us today. He has a PhD in economics from the University of Porto and did his postdoctoral research in Brazil. Alexandre is currently managing partner at Technopolis Group, Portugal and Brazil, and he has previously held a number of leading positions in the implementation of cohesion policy in Portugal. Alexandre is also a member of the DG Regio high-level expert group on smart specialization, and is with us today as the leader of the project on the Atlantic region, so the ESPON project, ongoing ESPON project. Welcome, Alexandre. To my right, I have Professor Tobias Schiller, who is then professor at the University of Erlangen-Nuremberg in Bavaria. His research focuses on regional development, particularly with focus on the Alpine space and on border areas. Tobias Schiller and his team have specialized in innovative mapping approaches and socioeconomic analysis of complex data. He has been involved in many ESPON projects. We've had the pleasure of working together on ESPON ACT area a few years ago. And he is currently coordinates the Interalp project, which was just closed, and he will present results from the Interalp project. Welcome, Tobias.
Thank you.
Last but not least, Giancarlo Cotella, also a full professor of spatial planning at Politecnico di Torino. He has more than 20 years experience in comparative spatial planning research. He has been involved in many ESPON projects, Interalp, Terrace, Urdeco, Metro, Super, Compass, so also established track record in ESPON. He recently edited the book, Spatial Planning Systems in Europe, Comparisons and Trajectories, together with Vincent Nadine and Peter Schmidt. and the Handbook of Territorial Governance with Umberto Giannin Rivolin. Since 2023, he serves as Secretary General of ESOP, the Association of European Schools of Planning. Welcome, Giancarlo. So, Giancarlo, you are here today as project partner for the ESPON Nostalgia project with specific responsibility for governance analysis across Europe. So I'd like to know if you can help us frame the notion of new and non-standard geographies more generally across Europe. What is it? How can we approach it analytically, these notions? And what factors drive them? What generates these kind of new? Why do we feel the need to invoke these notions now? And then I look forward to hearing more about how the governance approaches can be approached in the pan-European perspective. How can you actually synthesize, approach these novel approaches, a bit fuzzy maybe notions, in terms of their governance and the governance frameworks across Europe? So Giancarlo, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, Eric, thank you very much. And yeah, I'm happy to be here and to report some findings from this Nostalgia project that was about the territorial governance of non-standard geographies. As such, it was a very fuzzy project, and it was very much of an exploratory nature. To start reflecting on what non-standard geographies are, I think we should start to differentiate a bit between standard and non-standard geographies. And with standard geography, I think we mean those geographies that we can handle within traditional administrative boundaries. So it is a known path, known territory. Then we have the non-standard geographies that are the one that we try to explore within the project. And here we have basically those geographies that are of more functional nature. It means that they are function of some trends that do not follow the traditional administrative boundaries. And some of them are quite known. We talk since decades about functional urban area, labor market area. And we decided in the project that we are not going to tackle those that are like the usual suspect. We are going much more to explore, and then what we did, those geographies that are new and emerging. It means, as a logic, that there are some emerging trends that have an impact on interlinkages and relation on territories, and they manifest according to functional dynamics that perimeter and delimitate geographies that are non-standard in their essence. And this is what we try to explore in the Nostalgia project. And we didn't know what those geographies were in the beginning, so we try to explore. That's what I mean with exploratory project. We started from there were 9 or 10 macro trends, and I mentioned some. There was water management, there was circular economy, there was migration, health and aging, and so on, land and sea interaction. And we started to figure out, okay, when we talk about this field of inquiry, what trends are there emerging and what geographies they generate? And we started to run an expert consultation with stakeholders from high-level European institutions, and with their aid, we ended up defining 4 main themes that we explored more in detail in terms of what geographies they generate and how they are governed around Europe. And those themes are water management, and more in detail, how we do ensure fresh water supply in metropolitan regions. And you can see on the figures that you have overimpressed on your screen, this is something that is handled in a very different way around Europe. You can see on the right what is happening in the Paris region. We have various water basin area, I think around 12, that are called Établissements Publics Territoriaux. And they are served in terms of fresh water supply by 3 entities. And there is a big claim from the regional government that this should be unified under the regional government. And this is an issue. This is an issue because it will make the system more resilient and so on. And you see on the left side on the slide the Danish system that identify 4 water districts within which there are 23 water basins that include water catchment area. And that's again another way to govern this issue. Then another issue we explored was biodiversity preservation in terms of how to strengthen ecological connectivity. And again, here is something that in each country is handled in a different way. You can see on the right side, the longest grid network in Europe, the European grid belt. This is just one example of transnational, pan-European cooperation on how the issue can be handled. You see on the left side, an example from Albania that is very interesting, is the management plan of the Vjosa Wild River National Park, and how to manage the coexistence of people and animals and life form within an area that is one of the most untamed in Europe. You see on the bottom chart the example of the Spanish livestock trail with the Canadas Reales, that are the largest one of those, that extend between different autonomous communities. And therefore, because of that, their management require different and more tricky governance issues. Then we have example in relation to industrial transition, like the territorial industry that you see on the right, but also the North Atlantic hydrogen valley that you see on the left. And then you have another issue that we tackled that was how to promote local and regional energy savings. And again, all these issues were handled and are handled in different way in different institutional contexts in Europe. What we tried to do was, on the one hand, to map those geographies, and on the other hand, and this was interesting, to survey how they are governed, without assuming that to identify the geographies generated by this trend would entail a top-down institution of new territorial governance mechanism, but by trying to figure out how they trigger creative processes from the bottom, meaning how from the bottom up stakeholders, they self-organize and try to manage this that all of a sudden emerges as a governance challenge. And we figure out how this is happening, popping up in different places, and how these, what could be good practices, they somehow diffuse around Europe and so on. So this is what we did in the project, and this is how we are going to represent it and display and disseminate to people. We are going to build, and it's almost there, a territorial governance dashboard that will show in all countries in Europe how multi-level governance in relation to this 4 topic is organized, and somehow also to assess it according to various dimensions. And I think I will end up here. I'm already over time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giancarlo. I don't know if we already have some questions coming up on the Slido, but what strikes me immediately listening to you is how this renews the whole how we can approach territorial. From the EU level, the territorial approach, territorial tools has been a lot about integrated development. So we talked about community-led local development, integrated territorial investment. Everything was about bringing everyone around a territorial strategy. Now we approach these issues from a different angle. We start with a key challenge. Can we supply water in a stable, sustainable way for communities? Can we organize the industrial transition? Can we actually manage energy saving with the right skills, with the right combination of companies, all of that? How all these functional approaches come together somehow and create a huge challenge, of course, for concerned local and regional authorities, because that's how much can they effectively manage. What I'm wondering about is there a contradiction between the 2 approaches? Do they at the end come together jointly? How can you manage this complexity and this enormous demand for local and regional authorities to deal with a huge number of cooperation needs to adapt to these diversity of new geographies? I don't know if you have any immediate reflections on that, Giancarlo.
What we found out is so heterogeneous that it's very difficult to figure out a single answer. But what I notice is that on the one hand, there are some attempts from the top, meaning from the European Union, as you just mentioned, for integrated territorial investment, community-led local development approach, and so on, to put actors at the table. On the other hand, there are already spontaneous initiatives coming up from the bottom. For instance, all the issue of energy communities that started up and then it was somehow favored by the European Union. So I think that the crucial issue here is to find the nexus between the 2 and to put the 2 things together. So identify what is pouring up from the bottom up and then provide it with legs, with ad hoc institutional framework, with incentives and so on. I think that would make very much the difference. And not to make the mistake to think that one-size-fits-all approach could be good. In the sense that we notice how these trends, emerging trends generating this geography, generate different type of geographies in various contexts, and therefore the answer that are popping up are different and they must be different.
I guess the idea is the territory must be part of the answer. So when the local actors see this as part of the solution, then they naturally go into these and the territory becomes a lever to solve an issue, not an additional layer of cooperation, of coordination, which is somehow imposed on top of all the other tasks they are doing. And then, of course, sharing experiences. As I said, one size will not fit all, but sharing, disseminating good practice on how this can be done in an effective way, how we can, what type of evidence, how we can do it, changes the burden on the local authorities effectively. The governance dashboard you presented here also gives the idea of, depending on the regulatory framework, the types of incitations you can have from national levels, the preconditions to establish initiatives at the local level varies enormously. So the dashboard you presented on what types of frameworks are there within each member state is a very good starting point for further reflections. I understand it should be ready quite soon. Do you see how this could be used how can this dashboard be useful now in the next steps of reflections on new geographies?
Okay, yeah, the dashboard will be ready quite soon. We think in 2 or 3 months' time it will be online and operatable by people. And this will allow some benchmarking from the stakeholder side. So if I'm responsible for territorial governance in a specific place in Europe, I can go there, I can see how a specific topic is dealt with in my countries and compare with what is happening in the other country and check by clicking on the various dots there what instruments are in place and how various dimensions of territorial governance scores in relation to that. So for instance, how multi-level coordination or multi-actor coordination is happening. But one important thing that we are doing also in the ESPON Nostra Geo project is to analyze more in depth specific case studies that emerged from the territorial governance analysis as good practices. And this will help a lot. This is something that ESPON has been doing since its inception. And this is trying to gather knowledge concerning good practice and then disseminate it, not in a way to trigger necessarily policy transfer and emulation, but to trigger inspiration. Yeah, we know that policy transfer most of the time fails because it doesn't take into account institutional condition in the borrowing and the lending context, but it can provide inspiration. So borrow bricks of the territorial governance that happen in one place and implement it in another may put actors into an innovative thinking mood.
Excellent. So inspiration and benchmarking will be the key words. Results coming soon. Thank you very much, Giancarlo.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
We'll move on to another topic. So I said we're covering 3 different spaces. One is the Alpine region. And in the Alpine region, we have had an ESPON project focusing specifically on interface areas. So approaching the Alps as a series of interface territories between highland and lowland, and how that level is maybe, or is a promising context to explore these new geographies, to address them politically, to design strategies, to have a dialogue between stakeholders. So that's what I would hope to get from Tobias Chiller now, is a better understanding of what these interface areas are specifically, and whether one sees any need to change spatial planning policies to address these challenges at this level. So do we need to add adaptation of the frameworks to make it possible to work at the level of these interface areas? Tobias, please.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. And I'm happy to present here a bit of our project Interalp territories. And if I go to a photo that I brought, this is a photo of the Grenoble area. And this is taken from up above from the mountain and looking towards the lowlands. And this is a situation which is quite typical for Alpine contexts. We have the high mountain area in the back, and we have the pre-Alpine lowlands at the end of the photo here. And that kind of constellation we have all across the Alpine arc. It's not only in France, but it also in northern Italy, and in southern Germany, in Austria, and in all these countries. And in our project, we delivered a standardized definition of that kind of interface territories. So each of the areas that you see here on the map is one interface territory. And there's a complex formula behind. It's more than 1 page, and it's based on the settlement system, it's based on transport infrastructure, and it's based on topography, more or less. And with that kind of arguments, we come to that standardized definition of interface territories, where we say that they are comparable, that they come along with similar challenges and potentials too. So the geography as such might not be new, but the discourse on that kind of area is new. Until now, when we talk about the Alpine region, it's mostly a perimeter defined by topography. So the Alpine region is where the mountains are. But as we've seen at the example of the Grenoble photo, also the fringes are an important facet of Alpine spatial development. And we see here different kinds of interface territories. Some are more urbanized, like the Grenoble case or the Ljubljana case. Others are more rural, in particular in the Italian interface areas, and some are in between. But that's the kind of territory that we see here. And they are new also in an academic point of view, because when we talk about European spatial development, we normally talk about the FUAs, the functional urban areas, and what we see here is in the green and yellow colors, that's the classical functional urban areas, and you see there the perimeters of the interface territories, and there are often no FUAs, no big cities part of the interfaces. It's different in the case of Grenoble, that's true, but for most cases, they almost look empty, but that's not the case. I mean, if you enter into the Alps, there are a series of important and well-known settlements there that are simply not large enough to be known. And that's why we often use the slogan, roll beyond size. So even if a settlement has less than 10,000 inhabitants, it might be very important for spatial development, for the service of for public services and so on. So think about Oberstdorf, for example. It's a small, really small town. It's not a FUA, but it's important to talk about settlements like this in these areas. And I would say it's important not only for academic reasons, of course, but also because they are specific. This map shows that within most interface areas, the color scheme goes from dark red to dark green. And I can show you a series of maps that look more or less like this. This is about population. It's a demography indicator behind there, but I could also show you environmental indicators whatsoever. So there are very sharp contrasts, and these contrasts are sharper, or the contrasts are embedded in a smaller geography than at other areas. So it's particular to make spatial development in that kind of areas here. Plus, that map might be hard to read, but it shows the major transport corridors here, and they mostly have a kind of a funnel situation. So there come a lot of roads and rail infrastructures from the lowlands, meeting in these funnel situations, and then sometimes having kind of a dead end, and more often having kind of a transit funneling. Then they are coming along with very difficult planning challenges that you have to address here. So when you ask, Eric, should we do something about these topics, about these geographies, I would say yes, it's important to recognize them as really specific because they are different. Because in these funnel situations, you have a lot of demand for spatial development. You have all the corridors for transport, for energy, for all the tourists coming there. They are mostly attractive regions. I mean, this is where you go in the weekends, where you pass when you go into holidays and so on. They are mostly economically successful. So there's a lot of pressure on land use there, and coordinating it and handling it, this is a real challenge. And one should add, this is a so-called targeted analysis, so the project as such was not formulated by us, the researchers, but by stakeholders. The lead stakeholder is a German ministry, and other stakeholders came from Switzerland, from Austria, from Italy, and then there is a working group for spatial planning and sustainable development in the Alpine group behind there. That's institutionalized in the Alpine Convention framework, and they followed the process. So I would say already the institutional framework proves that there's a certain interest, but I'm already over time.
Thank you very much, Tobias. I think this is very interesting to see this way of approaching the Alps from a functional perspective. We have different approach. Alpine cooperation has been going on for decades. There have been long discussions on the Alpine core area, the objective of preserving an Alpine core, whether those are the real Alps or the others weren't false Alps then. The discussion where is it relevant to talk who is legitimate to talk about the Alps. Now, when you introduce interface territory, you say this is really a territory of interactions, and definitely we can then talk about planning in a meaningful way. We can compare practices in these interfaces because there are recurring patterns, and they may call for specific types of answers, and sharing experiences makes a lot of sense. What I'm wondering now, listening to you, having seen that this would make a lot of sense, have you seen people actually taking this on board, this opportunity for developing effective, meaningful spatial planning? Do you have good practices concretely observed already on the ground that can function as sources of inspiration for other areas around the Alps?
I mean, what we have not delivered is an evaluation of regional and municipal planning procedures at the local level. So this was not the objective of the project. But and Giancarlo was part of the team. What we did was a pan-Alpine, let's call it a screening of what's happening there. And what we also organized was a policy paper where we had a survey with really many experts from very different interface territories. And they contributed to a policy paper where there were three main points. One was really the recognition of interface territories as a specific type. That was one of the main outputs, and it's point one of this policy paper. And the second one, I have to take my notes there, was to address these challenges in a particular way. And the third one, I have to look it up later. But your question was rather what is being done in all these areas, and I would say that in most cases, it's a combination of already existing domestic instruments, so regional planning, municipal planning, sectoral planning, participation procedures, feedback loops, and so on. And I would say there are good cases as long as you consider the specificities of double demand on half of the space, as it's typical for these interface territories, as long as it's multi-level, and as long as you balance a strategic orientation and an implementation phase it. There are some examples that more explicitly or more directly address these interface territories. One is in the Torino area, the Metromontana, it's the process called. And I would also like to underline the Swiss agglomeration projects that explicitly address to link the real mountain regions with the pre-Alpine metropolitan areas. So there's a lot of dynamics going on the ground, so we don't have to tell these areas that they are interface areas. They know already, but as far as we receive feedback there, it helps them to position in the multi-level governance to be recognized as specific.
Excellent. Do you see already the Alpine Space Program, the Alpine Macro Region, the Alpine Convention playing a role in disseminating this perspective on development and the needs for certain types of dialogue, of establishing trust? We know that interest can be different, highland, lowland. Are they playing a role, and do you see that emerging? Can it maybe be a result of this ESPON project that they intensify efforts in that respect?
Well, I mean, the project was closed, I think, two weeks ago, so it's still quite early to talk about the impact of the reporting here. But what certainly is already true is that in the framework of the Alpine Convention, I already mentioned this working group on spatial planning and sustainable development. There's a process going on already for a couple of years that's also planned or foreseen to go on, and that elaborates an Alpine spatial development perspective. And that for sure will take on board the interface territories, and that really makes sense. I mean, it obviously does not make sense to always have islands maps of the Alpine region, but to also consider the fringes with all the complexities and the dynamics going on. So I expect a lot of follow-up within the framework of this process. Then I expect some regional or municipal activities to go on. I mean, you should ask Tomáš later on in the second session from the Slovenian ground what he's going to do with this. And we just had a tour de table at the end of the project with our stakeholders to ask, okay, what are you doing in Austria? And we have some ideas, and all the member states around the table had some ideas, but I think it's not my role to report on this because this is kind of a political process that I'm curious to follow.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tobias. I'd like to remind you from sitting and attending this event that you can submit the questions. So feel free to use the QR code. It can come up again now, I think, on the screen. And to submit also on past presentations, if questions come up, we are taking them on board. We'll have more rounds of discussion later. So any comments and questions are very welcome. So please use the Slido. We'll move on. We had then a presentation from the Alpine region, which is an established macro region now. We are moving now on to more initiatives to promote a macro-regional strategy, to try to establish and to make sense of what they could become. We're going to start with the Carpathian region, where there also have been a convention now for more than 20 years, so it's an established cooperation area, but as I said, not yet a macro-regional strategy. Katarzyna, you have coordinated the Carpat project, and we'd like to know how this project informed discussions on the unique features of Carpathian region and the potential value or added value of strength in Carpathian cooperation. And we'd like also to know more about your proposals on how Carpathian cooperation could be informed from these analyses. What kind of evidence need did you perceive, and how have you fed the stakeholders with evidence? Katarzyna, please.
Thank you. So definitely Carpathian cooperation is at more earlier stages than more advanced Alpine cooperation. And so I think it's important to maybe stress the obvious, the fact that mountainous areas are unlike river basins, unlike natural networks that connect, mountains divide people and divide communities and divide space. And so there is a strong need to find, governance solutions, and there is need for collaboration, especially now and especially in this up-and-coming macro region that is faced with many challenges, but also very dynamic social, economic, but also political issues. So first of all, if we talk about Carpathians and we think about the assets, the kind of strong capitals that they have, is many stakeholders, and also our own research shows that the natural heritage is an important feature. As you can see in the map on the left, Carpathian mountains host last truly wild and authentic woodlands in Europe. And maybe, and they are wild, and this is, I would say, a continental natural heritage that needs protection, and that has been protected on national levels. But there is a need to maybe think in a more macro-regional scale regarding this topic. Another important asset is the cultural heritage, which also is, to a certain extent, authentic, proved resilient, but is also at risk of being commercialized, drawn over with over-tourism. As you can see, the most valued cultural heritage locations are located within the mountain range of Carpathian Mountains. And this is linked to heritage and historic relationship with the mountains, coming up from the mountain communities like Górale, Lemkos, Bojkos, and Vlach shepherds, and also Huzuls in Ukrainian Carpathians. So, with these dynamic economic processes, there is a risk that these two most valuable assets will, to some extent, be at risk. This region is growing. This region is up and coming, and there is a visible divide of north western part, which is much more integrated within the European core economic networks and labor markets. And there is this southeastern part, which is lagging behind, but also facing very rapid growth in certain locations. So these mountains are dividing, but they're also an opportunity to link different sectors of economic growth and labor markets. Interestingly, this area is also polarizing. There are a lot of social processes going on. Strong metropolization, as we can see, with suburbanization. So on one hand, we have housing markets that are becoming much more competitive and exclusive. On the other hand, there are regions that are depopulating very rapidly and making it very challenging, again, to govern social services there. This region is also, or this macro region is also a place where many social risks are still very valid, where there is big pressure for economic-based immigration, outflow of people, and human capital. So these are some of the macro-regional challenges that are very same for many governments and also regional authorities. This is also a region that is not the most innovative. Not that there aren't many talented people or innovative institutions or companies. There simply still is not enough capacity or knowledge how to commercialize it. And so this is the region where a lot of industry and logistics is also placed. But this region is connected. The governance collaboration is there. There is also a visible and obvious policy mobility diffusing from the Alpine region through Vienna as a gateway of macro-regional collaboration. And in a Carpathian macro region, it's Budapest and Bratislava that are the main hubs. This region is also interconnected through transport links that are also being built through the mountains. So there are a lot of infrastructural projects going on, which are very high on policy agenda, especially on regional level. The big policy questions are: how do we protect nature? Are we ready for a more radical idea of the multinational national Carpathian Park? For some, this idea is too radical and controversial. Do we need a dedicated Carpathian program like Interreg? Or is the local and diversified governance collaboration enough? Do we need a contact point? And what are the sectors that we would like to cooperate? Is it only tourism and environmental protection? Or maybe also renewable energies, digitalization, and transport connectivity? Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Katarzyna. As I said, I'm quite curious about the added value of the Carpathian. How does it add something to local regional development, to the approach? You emphasize a lot nature protection, preservation of cultural heritage. Would you say that those are the key components in a context where we know there are major social and economic challenges, that the Carpathian level is an instrument to preserve the attention to also protection of biodiversity, of natural and cultural heritage in this context of major other challenges also?
I think that in terms of tourism, the trends that we can see, slow tourism, more authentic tourism, and linking natural tourism like hiking, biking, etc., to food tourism, right? Or spa towns. There are so many spa towns in the region. I didn't have enough maps to show you. This region has a tremendous potential in terms of that. I think it's trending. I think recently places like Moldova are trending because of its unique location, because it's the most unvisited place in Europe. So you never know with social media what will go in the pipeline in terms of visibility. But generally we can say that it's very coherent in terms of the image and potential are these two main Carpathian capitals, natural and social capitals. And also a lot of local authorities see this as a potential to gain economic movement, to transform the more rural economies towards tourism, to link the cities, like to maybe interlink the interface areas, which are not that well pronounced yet in the Carpathian macro-region, to build these interlinkages, to link depopulating areas to local growth nodes. And there will be investment in this area. It still has the price advantage, and with the geopolitics, also in terms of economic geopolitics, a lot of sectors are coming back to Europe, like manufacturing, maybe some electronics. This is the most possible investment region in Europe, and the growth will happen there. We need to protect the assets that have been there forever and are able to also transform the economies to a more green, sustainable, and circular economies, and not only manufacturing and building infrastructure for that type of sectors. So I think there is a link indeed, and it does translate to local decision making, and there is need for collaboration to strategize together and maybe collaborate rather than compete for investment and governance. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you very much. I think you reviewed a number of transformations that trigger the emergence of new geographies. Mm-hmm. These new geographies can become resilient, robust, if they're accompanied by appropriate spatial planning. So I think you touched on the series of topics we'll be getting back to in the final round of discussion. Thank you very much, Katarzyna. Alexandre, we will now move to the other side of the European continent. We are going to the western peripheries and facing the Atlantic. I would like you to know from you what common challenges and opportunities do you see in the Atlantic region? What have you identified in this ESPON project? And how do you think territorial cooperation and good governance can be enhanced in such a unique territory? Alexandre, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Eric, for the introduction, and thank you to ESPON for the opportunity to be here. The potential Atlantic macro-region is actually quite challenging because unlike other macro-regions, existing ones and potential ones, the Atlantic is a kaleidoscope of cultures, economic realities, very asymmetric, from industrial regions like Bilbao, Pays de la Loire, Porto, to very touristical regions with almost zero industry like the Canary Islands, to industry areas that are still very rural. And so these differences in terms of cultures, in terms of economic landscape, actually creates a puzzle of dynamics and trends that is quite challenging to tackle. And this is the first thing we notice when we're looking for the Atlantic macro region and its potential. Because what we are looking for is the value added of these new geographies. So to what extent creating a new geography can actually help in delivering the economic, political, societal goals that we are aiming to. And so when we're looking at this, we were looking at uncovering using the atlases and the trend analysis, uncovering these patterns that already exist, looking for functional areas, but also understanding when there are no functional areas, if those dynamics can be created. Because again, this is a very widespread territorial, and we need to find an identity. And when we started looking, I remembered when I was a kid and we looked at the world map. We always position Europe in the center, and so the dichotomy in terms center-periphery, we are in the center, and America or China are the periphery when we look at this. So when we look at European map from the usual perspective, what you'll see, I was moving too fast, what you'll see is that the center of Europe comes, especially when you look at innovation, and this is the result of the European Innovation Horizon, you'll see that from the northern part of Italy throughout Germany and a bit of France and the southern part of UK, you'll have the vast majority of innovation and growth potential, which is where the engine of economics in Europe lies. And this was called in the past the blue banana. And when we look at the positioning of the Atlantic macroregion, which is in the coastal area, we see that it is in the peripheral position if we look at our map like this. But if we look at the Atlantic, not in the perception that is turned towards Brussels or the center of Europe, but it's turned towards the ocean and the American continent and Africa. This means we have a central position that can be very interesting in projecting the influence, the economic links of Europe towards America and Africa, which in the current context of significant changes in geopolitical and geoeconomical, this can be an added value, it can be a signature. And when we were thinking about repositioning and the added value of these new geographies, we started looking also in terms of identity. And of course, we cannot replicate the blue banana, but we need the blue banana part of innovation in a more traditional sense of ocean technologies, maritime industries, etc. But we also could address the green part, and we could have a green and blue banana in the Atlantic coastal area, where we combine sustainability and innovation in terms of digital in the mega trends that we need to comply. Creating a new pathway of growth that also allows to respond to a big challenge, which is no matter what we are, although the Atlantic region is not growing poorly, it is growing slowly than other regions, and especially the center. So in order to catch up, we need a new stimulus and we need a new direction. And this was one of the major challenges. Of course, that there are other challenges that are relevant when we look at the aging population, which is more or less the pattern of Europe, but you'll see that in the coastal region of the Atlantic is pretty severe, especially in Portugal and Spain. And this is more aggravated by the fact that there is a socioeconomic divide between the urban and the rural areas in the Atlantic macroregion, or the potential Atlantic macroregion. So we have common challenges that we need to find the right value proposition. Administrative boundaries provide a governance framework that is interesting and is solid and is established. But we must not allow these administrative boundaries to become a constraint over growth, over other flexible approaches, and we don't see that a potential macroregion is a competitor to the traditional national and the regional level, but a complement to address what is common and to create the necessary scale to reposition all the region towards the Atlantic and respond to these challenges, where not only the aging that we need to deal together, but also the issues that are associated with this, like migration. Some of these regions have been replenishing its population stock and labor force stock through migration, and we also need to address this. And finally, related to this, also highlight a major challenge. It's not historically strange that the blue banana is in the center of Europe. This is where the most advanced industries, the most advanced research institutions, and the largest concentration of human capital lies in Europe. And when you look at the human capital in the Atlantic region, you see a pattern that is also worrisome. We have still a significant deficit in terms of tertiary education, especially in comparison to the center of Europe. And we also have a deficit in terms of competencies and skills in levels 4 and 5 of each set, especially targeted for the new technologies upcoming, robotics, digital, etc. So if the human capital and the labor force is not ready to absorb technology and to use it properly, this means that we will be somehow stumbling in our own feet. So in essence, we had two major challenges. One, trying to analyze and uncover the patterns and the functionalities, and secondly, also strategically imagine how can a macro region be a better fit in terms of addressing new challenges and devising new dynamics, which clearly are necessary. Otherwise, the center-periphery dichotomy will still hold for the many upcoming years.
Thank you very much, Alexandre. I think you very nicely synthesized the specificity of the Alpine area, how it relates to the rest of Europe. I'm wondering, when you now think about common traits, whether you see new geographies in this area that have a specific shape in the Atlantic compared to other parts of Europe, whether these new geographies are within the Alpine region or whether they connect the Alpine region to the more continental parts of Europe. Where do you see, what's your take so far in the project on the specificities of new geographies in the Atlantic region?
I imagine you were mentioning the Atlantic, although you're mentioning a lot of time the Alpine.
I'm sorry, I was talking Atlantic.
We don't have the mountains, we have the sea.
Sorry.
The issue of the Atlantic, even the Atlantic, because it's quite different and it's quite widespread, this means that we will have functional or sub-macro regions that will collate. We did a network analysis, giving you an example, network analysis on Horizon programs to understand a little bit the focus of the scientific institutions and the companies pertaining to these regions. And this uncovers a very different pattern. When we're looking at maritime technologies or maritime industries, not in the sense of fisheries, but robotics, naval construction, you'll find a pattern that is mostly linked to the most industrialized regions, and where regions like Algarve or Canary Islands will not show up. When you're looking at the few projects that are on tourism, of course, those regions light up in the network analysis. So the potential macro region is very different and very scattered in terms of their innovation potential. So establishing the links and the functionality is not easy per se. What we believe is that there are common challenges that can create common missions to be addressed. And this allows for a reorganization of the space. And this will allow also to a flexible reorganization of the space. So some of the questions will be answered within the setting of the macro region, but not necessarily by all the regions that are part of the macro region. But the macro region provides the right umbrella to gather this enough critical mass, enough competencies, and especially to devise a new identity, a new value proposition that is common to all and that embraces the Atlantic not only by its past history that all these regions have, but also embrace it as the new economic opportunity, the new West. And in that sense, the macro region as a whole is the interface of Europe with the rest of the world, especially the West world.
Excellent, thank you very much. I think you very nicely synthesized where the macro region can make a difference, how establishing an alternative model, and that you need a critical mass in this model in order to impose it somehow, to make it relevant, maybe in interaction with EU bodies, but also in interaction with the regions themselves, that they are not alone in this. This is being established jointly, and then it gets another legitimacy in each regional context to establish. So thank you very much for this. Great, we've now been going around Europe somehow in different respects. We've been approaching this notion of new geographies, functional areas from different perspectives. You've touched on the topics in different ways. I think still could be useful to go around a bit to get a synthesis. If I tell you, is the macro region itself a functional area, how would you answer? Is each of your macro region considered a functional area, or how would you answer that question? Maybe Tobias, if you could start on this.
That's a big question. Thanks for this. First of all, the Interrail project was not on the macro region as such, but I like to discuss this topic. I mean, when you talk about mountain regions, you define them normally with a topography, which is a homogeneity indicator. So it's not a functional region. I mean, there are certainly a lot of functions within this homogeneous topography in a way, but it's not a functional approach there. So if you want to define a macro region with a functional indicator, then you have to prove that the interlinkages within this area is stronger than between the area and beyond. And I'm pessimistic that it's possible. So if you see the, let's say, the Austrian highlands and the Austrian lowlands, there are certainly more interlinkages than between the Austrian highlands and the French highlands, because there it's difficult to have interlinkages there. So I would say it's hard to prove functional definitions in mountain areas. But, and now there comes Interalp in the game, all countries that have an alpine share, they have these interface territories. So it's a common challenge in the territory. And via this argument, I would say there are strong arguments to say that the macro region, or let's put it rather as a pan-alpine governance approach, does make sense. Because if you have that kind of common challenges, you need a platform where you can exchange on this, where you can discuss solutions and so on. And just to be clear in the wordings, in the Alpine region, we have a macro region, which is the USALP, and then we have the Alpine Convention, which is a multilateral intergovernmental treaty and framework. Both are pan-Alpine, and for both settings, it certainly makes sense to talk about common challenges. I don't know if that's an answer, but it's a try.
Thank you very much. Now, this is a very good starting point. I'll continue going around. Katarzyna, for the same question, are the Carpathians a functional area? What is your take on that?
Well, I definitely have to agree with Tobias that it's the challenges that would define what is common in this area rather than connections. And in case of Carpathian macroregion, and in case of the debate or the possible policy solution that we were proposed by the stakeholders, there are two competing geographies, the Danube River Interreg program and whole macro-regional collaboration, which is much easier, much more natural, much more structurally similar, right? And then we have the idea that there might be a Carpathian Interreg program, which would encompass most of the countries that are in the Danube program, and there is a political clash, and there is something that would need a lot of argumentation for the EU to make this decision. So there is, of course, this very specific issue in this very specific case of Carpathian Mountains. However, when it comes to challenges, I think that especially with environmental protection, and this is the most, the most active topic that the Carpathian Convention members are into. This needs, I would say, international governance. So the topic of the Carpathian multinational national park has been put by environmental organizations on the table. It's being contested, it's being supported. There are a lot of arguments for and against it. However, it would need definitely this macro-regional approach to governance, and there has been bottom-up movements to do it, especially in the project National Parks, which tries to look for some standards, some type of unification of protection policies among all of the singular national parks, which are based in Carpathian Mountains. So I would say both, really. Okay. To sum up your question, yeah.
It's a very interesting point. We may get back to it more in detail. But when you think of a national park, then we have a specific axis in the Nostalgia project about ecological connectivity, trying to explore, do policies adapt to ecological corridors of different kinds? The question is whether the essential justification of a possible Carpathian natural park would be, because this makes sense in terms of nature protection, or is it essentially because we need some kind of political weight behind the initiative, which then requires a transnational agreement to be upheld? What is the key? And
yeah, I think politics in this case is very temporally sensitive. And namely, now the geopolitical situation is very much in favor of collaboration. And I think both in economic terms, but also in terms of security issues, the mountainous areas are really important in terms of international security. And therefore, now there is this window of opportunity to set up macro-regional collaborations, regardless of this evidence-based policy recommendations regarding economy, environment, etc. There is a political will and window of opportunity. So I think this is also a very important factor in making up for macro-regional political initiatives that do have certain budgets as well, yeah.
I think you illustrate very nicely how producing applied research on this it's increasingly obvious that applied research is a dialogue. It's not a linear process where you deliver to what the policymakers need. No, you listen to what policymakers, what processes they're into. You talked about geopolitical windows of opportunity, and that determines how we can help. And that's a debate we'll have later this morning on how exactly can we help best, and getting fully engaged in this dialogue perspective, the non-linear, the circular, the constant dialogue, and then what is the evidence behind to guide this dialogue. Sorry, Alexander, we're getting lost a bit in the Carpathians, but we'll certainly move on to the Atlantic. What is your take? You touched on the topic previously, but on the Atlantic as a functional area, maybe you can synthesize a bit your view on that.
I would say that the Atlantic and several areas of cooperation across Europe are in tendency functional, but in practice dysfunctional, which is not the simplest thing to say, but the fact is it's hard to break the boundaries of administrative frontiers. It's necessary to have clear mandates in the institutions. It's necessary to have a clear political commitment within this process in order to make it happen. And the biggest challenge here is to understand, and that is apprehended by most, what is the value added of the macro region, and why do we need it, and if this is the best geography to tackle the issues that we agree it's our mission. And in this sense, what we believe is that this is, like you were saying, this is an ongoing learning process, that it is fundamental that is able to mobilize all stakeholders, to mobilize people, to involve them in defining the strategy and the missions that we want to target together. And this is a process of transformation. This is of creating a vision of change. And this is the biggest challenge in the Atlantic macro-regional potential. We need to come up with a vision that creates unity towards others and that mobilizes actors in order for the institutions to actually spend resources and allocate resources to find these geometries of collaboration, which is hard because in the end of the day, we're asking institutions that are regionally bounded or nationally bounded to establish cooperation, which is almost like an extra job. So this is actually a little bit tricky to implement. I would say that the biggest challenge here is, especially in the case of the Atlantic, is not looking for the functional aspects, because there's lots of dysfunctionalities also because of the geography and the institutional landscape, different countries, different ministries, different levels of regional autonomy. So this is quite puzzling. It's easier to do it, in my perception, the other way around. Let's try together to come up with a common vision, a common trajectory, where it's easier to identify how we can all contribute to the same and how we all benefit from that. The socioeconomic benefits need to accrue to everybody, otherwise people don't mobilize. And I think this is the biggest challenge that we also see in Europe. We will see the mobilization of Europe because we have, I will say it anyhow, but we are now identifying common enemies or common issues that are very worrisome. And so this means that we are converging. And let me add two things, which I think are the great opportunities for the Atlantic macro region. Defense, because as mountains are important, ocean control is very, very important for defense. And that's not possible without the Atlantic regions. This is the gateway of Europe. This is where the majority of the infrastructure, even connectivity towards America, go through. So this is a key issue. And reindustrialization can take stock on this demand pool that will come from defense, which is very innovative, and they can benefit from it. And then renewables. The largest potential of energy production from renewables, especially wind, is there. But again, it's important the coalition of these regions for one simple thing, and you know this from every country. There's a dam in a rural area, but the benefits accrue to the capital city because this is where the headquarters of the company that owns the dam are. So the generation of the wealth in the ocean will be benefited by Berlin, Paris, and not by those regions. So we need to have a joint coalition that somehow can fight for a better distribution and to somehow create and jointly create responses to the challenge interactively. For me, the most important thing, and I think you were brilliant on that take, is that this applied research is interactive and iterative. It will take time. We are improving in terms of governance skills. What we need is something that is very complex, which is polycentric governance. Polycentric in the way that it's not just multi-level, that we are somehow coordinating national levels, regional levels, local levels, but also cross-cutting, because we also need to address the silos that are thematical in our own government structures and agencies. And when tackling this, we need an ensemble solution, not a partial solution, which is the biggest challenge and difficulty that we'll have. So in a very humble way, what we intend, and I'll finish, is to identify one or two missions that somehow can be the prototypes and the departure points to starting to structure a joint agenda, a joint thinking, a joint action, and most importantly, a common identity.
Excellent. I think you very nicely synthesize how new geographies is also a geography of policy projects, of ambitions. It's not only realities as they emerge and handling, it's about how do we deal with geopolitical transformation? How do we deal with green and digital transformation of industries? How do we deal with impacts of climate change? All of this comes together somehow, but it's a new geography and it's not adapting, it's about the projection into a project. And then what are the projects of new geographies and what do they imply? So I think that's a fascinating projection. What I also take from this discussion is how we're moving into complexity, which maybe challenges traditional maps, the way we look at the territory. It is not pretty, the map where you have the Carpathian very extensively overlapping with the Danube. Somehow our cartographic imaginations are a bit struggling to say that this is an appropriate framework. At the same time, you nicely illustrated, Katarzyna, how issues are different and there is a justification for different types of cooperation, mainly a lot in the same areas, and that the new geographies of the Carpathians are different from the new geographies of the Danube. So the coexistence of these different instances can be demonstrated. We then need to find a language to convey this. The challenge we may have, we may get back to that later this morning rather, is about how we work on this a bit full time. We are very much engaged in these issues. Some picture emerges. How do we convey these types of ideas of new missions, of new types of arrangement, new types of system transformations to a broader audience, which makes it politically viable? How do we give it? Typically, we talked also about having an Interreg, Carpathian Interreg. Well, we know that Interreg programs, they are not overlapping so much. Well, at least they are supposed to be some kind of partition of the EU space with some nuances. Well, now what you're saying is, well, we have a space which is much more overlapping. How can this be brought into the policy making of how transnational cross-border programs are being designed, thought through? How do you incorporate interfaces in cross-border cooperation, etc.? So you have a complexity of space which we somehow need to find ways of, we should help policymakers of making them conveyable, understandable, generating imaginations, and what kind of figures, what kind of representations can we then use to make these representations understandable to a broad audience, to make it manageable, basically. I don't know if anything emerges from the Slido, if we have an audience, our audience is interested in what we say, if you think this is stimulating in some way. We're very happy to have your comments as well. Does it seem meaningful? Do you have any reactions on what we're saying? I see some questions coming up. Now I have many coming up, so I'll try to. Technical definition of what is understood by new geographies I see on top here. I don't know if there is a technical definition. I think on the contrary, it's a very non-technical issue, but do you have any comments, maybe Giancarlo, if you want to comment on definition of new geographies?
I can try. It's not really technical, but it's what we used in the project, in the sense that to define new geographies, we started from the trends. We define a new geographies that emerge and respond to specific emerging trends. Mm-hmm. Then we had to narrow down because of the magnitude of the project. But basically, any geography that emerges in response to emerging trends that is not overlapping with traditional administrative geographies or with the usual suspect of functional geography, we can define as new geographies. I wouldn't label macro-regions as new geographies and as functional geographies, as it was already discussed here, but they could be governance platform for handling new geographies. In the sense that we saw from the map that all our colleagues have shown today, how many of the trends that we explored for the Nostra Geo project, they do have some relevance in terms of challenges, but also potentials for specific territories in the macro regions. And to govern them, you cannot do it through traditional administrative boundaries. So to have a container, a very porous container of polycentric governance, I really like the definition that Alexander has brought forward, would help. So I think the issue here is how to motivate actors to buy in to this structured platform of polycentric governance. They need to see that there is an added value. And this you find and you show for research, and this interactive approach to research in which you don't feed policymaking and you are not just asked to feed policymaking, but you recursively interact and discuss challenges as well as opportunities. Not only about challenges. I think it's about challenges and opportunities. And I see in the 3 macro regions there are a lot that somehow link to the trends that we analyze in the Nostra Geo project.
Excellent. This notion of polycentric governance I'd like to stick to a little bit. I think, how can we convey it? Is this links different territories then? We're linking across. And is it then sectorally driven, this idea, well, energy is produced in one part, it's being transformed into value in another part. How do we bring this together in some kind of fair distribution of benefits, of burdens? So is it a sectorally driven process with territorial implications? Is that how you see it? I don't know, Alexander, if you want to get back to what your understanding of this polycentric governance.
I see it around missions. Not sectoral, but missions. So if our challenge is to tackle energy safety, energy security of Europe, based on renewables, imagining, so we need to find a solution that combines different interests, even in terms of spatial planning in the sea, because this will conflict with fisheries, this will conflict with trade routes, this will conflict with connectivity. And so when we're mentioning polycentric, we are acknowledging that from the strategy to implementation, usually it's not a single direction solution. We need to have a multi-dimensional solution that is not simply dependent on different levels of governance, it's dependent on different areas of governance and different departments. And I think this is a key bottleneck that limits us. Because when I'm talking about polycentric governance, I'm talking about a more flexible arrangement, a new geometry, not a new geography, or if you want, also a new geography of institutions that are gathered around a mission, which allows for a wholesome response to this challenge. Otherwise, we always have a partition, the challenge. The science part will think about research, but then no economy whatsoever. The economy part will think, yes, let's do renewables, but the lands that are generating the revenue see no benefit at all. And they are created an environmental cost because you plant the windmills on sea, you generate an environmental cost for those regions to which no benefit accrues. But the answer needs to be joint together. And this is why I call polycentric. It's not enough just the multi-level scenario. We need a more complex setting of governance. And this is why I think the macro-regional will provide a good environment for this.
Bringing this down to concrete evidence, now we're talking about how can we, as an applied research program, contributors to a program at least, contribute to inform these discussions. What you just presented implies we should focus more on territorial implications of more, let's say, spatial policies like transitioning to renewable energy. What does it imply across Europe? What are the positive, negative impacts on different territories? And that as a starting point for a discussion then on how it can be governed.
I would start with one basic thing, which also helps me to reply to one of the questions around CBAS and strategy, which is we are not bad at devising the strategy. We are not good at implementing it. So our ability in EU as a whole, but especially in these regions, we write nice strategies, very well thought of strategies, but then implementation is a very different thing. And why do we have this implementation trap? Because we have competing institutions, competing territories, where we are actually competing against each other. We should be competing against China and the US. So we are misfocusing our competition. And because of this overlap of institutions, this overlapping of turfs, this creates a puzzle that is hard. And this is why it's necessary a platform of governance, like a macro region, to actually deploy the strategy. When I'm talking about polycentric and giving this example, we need to find a way of integrating the different topics of, for instance, let's look at the ocean. We are looking at ocean technologies. It's obvious for everybody that there's a huge untapped potential in the sea, but we have not untapped for many years. And we are still way far from it, because there was never a strong focus that was mobilizing not only researchers but also economic activities to find ways to make the sea profitable. And when we want to exploit the sea and create a pilot zone for testing technologies, we will need to handle security and defense. We'll need to handle the science part, we need to handle the economics, the environmental. So all these 4 or 3 dimensions need to be taken into the solution, the institutional solution, in order to make it feasible. This is all actually true also in basic stuff. For instance, not talking about the Atlantic, but the part of the sea, the Northern Sea, that is shared by the small coast of Belgium. The small coast of Belgium is shared by 16 ministries. 16. So it's impossible to think of a policy addressing the coast of Belgium without somehow finding a way of creating a coalition between these 16 ministries. Now, take this to a different level, and the challenge is much greater. For me, polycentric governance is the next step beyond. And where research is important is not only identifying this mission, but also learning how to make these processes feasible. Because this institutional framework is quite complex. We need to find a way of making it very clear to the political stakeholders and institutional stakeholders, why is this matter? Why is this relevant? And then pass this to a clear mandate, institutional mandate, and to which is also necessary one very important thing. We need better institutions, we need capacity building to prepare these institutions to think beyond their own administrative frontiers. Because we're talking about cooperation, but if I don't know you, it will be very hard to connect effectively. So we need to find ways that Interreg already helps, but find ways to create joint capacities to address this issue. And this is why I think that the easiest way is either a common goal or a common enemy to unite people behind it.
Excellent. Which maybe you wanted then to address briefly the question on why you need a macro-regional strategy when you already have a sea basin strategy for the Atlantic, in a few words.
Yeah, we need the macro-region as a platform for governance. And also like a massive political and governmental forum. It's not a discussion forum, it's a political forum where we are able to mobilize the regions and institutions toward those missions. The Sea Basin Strategy provides the strategic landscape, but as many strategies in Europe, the outcomes are very slim. You mentioned Brazil. What I was studying there is transmission mechanisms, which is basically when you have a strategy, how you transfer it into practice. And we have a huge, powerful engine and strategy that we devote with the RDF and so on, but then our transmission mechanism is so long that the power that reaches the wheels, like in a car, is much less than the one that we generated. So we are not able to deliver results because we are lacking the right governance frameworks to actually have a complete response to these challenges. And this is why I believe that the macro region is essential for this. If it's macro, if it's meso, it's not relevant. What is relevant is finding a geometry that can actually deliver a full response. Otherwise, what you have is always a disconnected response, which impact in the territory will be very basic.
Thank you. Giancarlo, you wanted to comment on?
Yeah. Again, on this polycentric governance notion, I think it will also somehow help us to not see the overlapping of macro regions as a problem. Kasia was mentioning how the Carpat macro region would overlap partly with the Danube region, but actually there is already an overlapping between the Danube region and the Adriatic-Ionic region and with the Alpine region as a part. And I think this is not an issue if we consider it from the polycentric governance perspective. Actually, the density of this macro-regional cooperation and governance will somehow be an evidence of how that territory, it is at the crossroad of phenomena right now. If you think about the area of the Carpathian, and it is at the very forefront of European integration at the moment. Yeah? The enlargement is happening in that area. And it is at one historical low at the moment in terms of pace. And it's something that Europe need to consider. So to provide a platform would keep the momentum going, in my opinion. That's another important thing for that territory, is that is at the crossroad of logistics and transportation. It is where the two roads of the Belt and Road Initiative meet. And to have a platform that allows actors to coordinate, it would somehow be a very important antibody against the free-for-all approach that has been adopted by a country in negotiating in the Belt and Road Initiative environment. So I think geopolitically, to have cooperation in the Carpathian area, and generally speaking, in that part of Europe, is particularly important. And from the other end, what Alexander was saying on the Atlantic, it is similar. You were mentioning how it is important for defense, but it's also important for cooperation with the other side of the Atlantic, not necessarily in defense matter. No? It is more than ever important nowadays that we build bridges somehow, and through this polycentric governance, we can do that, I think.
Excellent. You mentioned infrastructure and transport connection. We have a concrete question on TEN-T, on the North Sea Rhine-Mediterranean corridor, a structuring element now in Europe. Whether this is a new geography, do you see it as a potential macro-regional context? This is a very different approach. Up to now, we've been talking a very established notion, Atlantic, Carpathian, Alpine. These are very old, established subdivisions of the European Union. Now, a transport corridor is a different beast somehow. And how does that change the perspective?
It is very interesting because on the one hand, it is very sectoral. No? We're talking about transport, we're talking about mobility, we're talking about logistics. But then this is having an impact. Wherever it is realized, it doesn't talk anymore about transport and logistics only. It changes the life of people. It generates or not territorial development. And here again, we should consider the difference of implementation of the Trans-European network in Europe and the infrastructural corridor that belong to the Belt and Road initiatives, and what impact they leave on the ground. So again, I think it's very important to consider the governance network that are triggered by this Trans-European network. You could really see how they engage with actors from various levels, multi-levelly, and also from the bottom up, providing a platform for interaction of the actors from municipalities, for instance, or anyway, local governments. So I would say it is a positive model. I'm not sure it is a new geography. They are there from some time. But again, the provision of this, what we call porous platform of polycentric governance, could help to keeping it all together, sticking it all together. Because if we keep seeing that as sectoral, then we don't get out of the conundrum we have.
I think we start emerging, the structuring of the dialogue interests me. We start seeing now a meaning of these transnational areas, creating a critical mass in that legitimacy for a certain way of approaching space at local, regional level, at EU level. It's important in that respect. We have the notion of new geography, which is really about what emerging trends generate, what policy projects generate. So new geography is really about somehow moving along the trend of what policymakers, we as a communities want, and what we see as changing our daily lives, our economic development perspectives, our need to preserve biodiversity, etc. And then we have this polycentric governance models coming on top and adding up how we can translate this into policy messages. So I think it's very interesting through the dialogue now between the projects, how we see a clarification of the discourse, which would then be very important to convey further in order, precisely as to bring clarity into these discussions. What is a new geography? What is a functional area? Why do we need transnational levels? What is their role in all of that? So thank you very much for that, for those allowing us in a way to clarify the discourse in these ways. I see some other questions. Maybe we can go also a bit around the detailed or specific points. There was a specific point now, you talked about the demographic challenge, Alexandre, in the Atlantic area. Returning of people, what concretely answers, what does it call for? The question I asked was about policies to incentivize young people to return. There are many other ways of trying to deal with this challenge of access to skills and people in more peripheral parts, which also is relevant for other macro regions, by the way.
This is an interesting question because I can do the connection also with the issue of the polycentric governance. These regions, that most of them were developing regions or less developed, they receive ERDF funding and ESF funding to improve their universities, their institutions, and to create human capital that then moves to the center of Europe where the majority of the economic stronghold is. So this detachment implies that although we are fostering human capital, they are migrating, and our assets are moving towards the center and making the periphery even weaker. And this implies that we are not changing that's economic reality. We can, in the setting of a polycentric approach where we can stimulate governments also to provide a better spread of the industry and these companies, maybe that's a solution, but more importantly, we need to compensate this exit with entrances. And so we need not only to re-attract, which is the answer, people that have left and want to come back home and create tax benefits, which in some cases already exist, to bring them back home and create a more economically competitive environment for them. But at the same time, we also need to replenish, and for this, migration can be very important. We need migration not only for the basic services that we are using for tourism. Tourism and agriculture depend almost exclusively on migration now, which is quite worrisome, but we also have the opportunity of bringing people that are now qualified from South America, etc., and somehow replenish the stock of people that we are losing to the center of Europe because of the gravity effect, if you want, the economic gravity. So again, I think this is an interesting approach to address this, but there are incentives to come back home, but again, also disaggregate it.
I think we can maybe go around the table on these demographic issues, which are key, a starting point. I don't know if the interface territories, you look at demography and demographic trends, which are quite different in the different parts of interface area, Tobias, in the Alpine context?
Yeah, it's quite heterogeneous across the interface territories, but also within. I mean, it's often the case that in the lowlands you have a lot of attraction, and in the highlands it's much more difficult, but there's not much, not really the one size fits all solution to it. And I would say in the end, it's really what one of the last comments says. It's about process governance. This is really how you have to address these things. It's not about so much formats or instruments and not even budgets as such. It's really about a process. And process means how can I get the right people around the table? In my case, from the highlands and the lowlands, but also across the sectors. I mean, it's rather easy to find technical solutions for transport issues, for energy issues, for housing issues, for ecological connectivity issues, but to find solutions that are integrated, that's the issue then. And then you have periods where you have to address new challenges. We have talked about geopolitics, or it can be hazard prevention in some areas of the Alpine area. And so how can you ensure a process that can adapt to new challenges, that is sure to have the right people around the table, and that does not end in the implementation trap, as you put it, and that has to foresee from the beginning responsibilities, resources, and objectives also. And I think it's a hard way in the Atlantic area to find that kind of setting. I think in the Alpine region we started much earlier, and there are a lot of formats in place. But still, on the ground, it's quite difficult. And coming back to demography, I mean, this is really place-specific, and there you have to go into. I mean, there are touristic projects that try to find ways via second homes and stuff like this. And there are also very official in-migration strategies to really cover the need for qualified staff. I mean, this is a discussion of its own. But yeah.
I just feel it's important. We talked a lot about industrial transitions, biodiversity preservation. Maybe it feels a bit far away from local realities of individuals, but we have new geographies of aging. We have new geographies of our health provision. We know Alpine area, Carpathian, Atlantic, they're all struggling with how do you effectively preserve access to health services in the context of aging. With increasing dependency on migration, the geographies are changing. And also that is a factor. If you do not have access to health, you will not have economic development. These are all bottlenecks. Everything is interconnected. And there again, what would then be the polycentric governance of adequate, sufficient access to health services, to services for our seniors in a context of aging in these areas which have a specific geographic preconditions. Katarzyna, do you want to comment from your perspective? I know it's also a big challenge in the Carpathian area.
Well, yes. First of all, I think even though when this macro-regional structure, like official governance structure, doesn't happen, but there is demand, other things happen. And this is what we can see in the Carpathian macro-region, that there is no formal Interreg program, but the density of the EGTC collaboration, of Euro-regions collaborations, of different Interreg collaborations, cross-border programs, or bigger within the Central Europe Interreg, is happening. And I did this analysis in spatial terms myself, and I was really surprised how densely packed the different levels of collaboration, starting with the smallest, cutest EGTCs connecting 3 towns, and ending up with this big Central Europe Interreg. And this is really densely packed, and I would say this is very multi-level, and it includes both territorial collaboration and also sectoral collaboration. And so in our project, we did this little intellectual and research-based exercise regarding what you were saying about building a vision. So what we did is we literally put many different maps regarding economic issues, regarding potentials, regarding megatrends, regarding dynamic indicators, static indicators, structural indicators. And then we decided, okay, what is the common goal? Green transformation, sustainable transport, environmental preservations. These were policy goals that the stakeholders named, right? And then we thought about how to support for decentralized resilience, because this is what is very important for the security. Of course, like the top-down approach is very important, having the same vision, having standardized procedures, but it's also what is the condition of the locality. And then we tried to make these visions according to different accents, different scenarios, but taking into consideration what is going on in the locality at NUTS 3 level, because this is a very important level. And we are now editing, together with the ESPN program and the stakeholders, the results of our visions, our, maybe it's too far to say territorial scenarios. But it was surprisingly, it went surprisingly well. So I think it's also a responsible of the researchers and stakeholders to put this knowledge together, layer by layer, and to look at the small locality, or the NUTS 3, or the regional locality, and see in which ways can we adapt our growth using our assets in order to achieve synergies of the common strategic goal. And I think, yeah, it really needs a dialogue between these different groups, the policymakers, the researchers, the stakeholders. And I think this is the biggest advantage of the ESPN program, that it allows these exercises to happen.
You're touching on a very important point. How can we as ESPN program contributors inform these policy processes? How do we become aware? We know that we're in a context of extensive uncertainty. We do not simply know what is coming in the years, what will we need. We have enormous knowledge gaps on what is there, where are the biodiversity issues really, how do we deal with them, what resources, what type of resources do we have, mining, energy, what technologies are coming up. So many elements we do not know, so we need to, or policymakers need to come up with collaboratively with reasonable solutions, reasonable sharing of burden facing this extensive uncertainty. And we then should be, ideally, in a position to inform these discussions, saying, okay, you come up with these solutions, I have these and these types of data, types of analysis to help you, okay, give some kind of helping build an informed position in relationship to these choices. I don't know if you see already, you've been working on specific macro-regional strategy, if you see the starting point for this interface between policymakers, communities, needs, and us as researchers coming up, do you see a perspective for how applied research on territorial development could be further developed? Tobias, if you can.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe I would like to respond as part of a targeted analysis, because there you have the other way around, where really the policy has formulated the question in the beginning, and then it's the analytical part to contribute, to help, to reflect. So it's not so much as in fundamental research where you live in the ivory tower and then just have fancy ideas, but it's a transdisciplinary approach. And from my perspective, this is really really a strong point from the ESPN project, that it's a real interaction between stakeholders and the analytical part. And I think in our Interalp project, it was a lot about visualization, because many stakeholders, they knew about it. It's, it's difficult, it's different, it's specific, but seeing it on maps with these clear colors makes a difference. And I mean, ESPN is not a mapping program, but all the mappings, they do make a difference. This is the first point. And the second point is really having this comparative perspective. I mean, the people from Grenoble, they know much more about their interface territory than we do. And you can go across all the interface territories. But having the whole picture across the Alpine arc, that can help saying, okay, we are not alone, but there are some really comparable perspectives. That does help. And then thirdly, you have a structured process. I mean, it's not this policy rhythm that sometimes is ad hoc or just reacting, but it's saying, okay, we have a process with reporting, with dissemination things that helps also to have an agenda setting, which maybe was one of the more important points in my project or in our project.
Would what you say, would that imply that a possible future development would be to have a real type of benchmarking interface where you look at what is going on in these. You saw Torino has been doing a lot. Now maybe Grenoble wants to compare to Torino. They should have a place to go to follow up what is happening. And then you have all the others that are maybe less, not come quite as far in their reflections on the interface territory approaches.
I mean, of course, I would say, well, firstly, the interest and the feedback from the policy side was quite positive in this project. So I expect that there will be processes going on, and of course, it would be a project idea to have a group of the willing interface territories to exchange and to do things together. This is nothing that I have planned from a top-down, a structured approach. I'm just curious to see what will happen there. But normally in European territorial development, that's how it goes. You have a new pattern, a new topic emerging, and then those who are interested, that are advanced, they exchange experience about it, that maybe test things about it, and that cooperate then. I think the potential is large here.
Excellent. We have a question on the new program architecture. This is maybe more a question for our next speakers, but I think already now you're touching on things. Maybe evidence can be a starting point. This, what you're talking about, having this full scale, is actually maybe not quite a program, but it's definitely a very big project. So it's a very big endeavor to have an effective dialogue format for all these territories. Katarzyna, on the same question then, of how do you see the starting point for a really informed, applied research, informed by what goes on in these small areas you mentioned, informed by policy processes at national level? You talked about centralized resilience, so different policy levels. What's your take on that?
I think, again, the participatory process that is embedded into research is very important. And just making the stakeholders and decision makers aware that they are not alone is maybe not half of the job done, but it's building awareness. And I think what is important is to really not provide solution where one size fits all, but really encourage using knowledge to develop tailor-made solutions for particular territories. Of course, we might, and this is what we also used in our project, we might provide a typology of these specific territories, of these new geographies that do facing challenges. But then I think at the planning level, where do we build? There is a big, the biggest issue and like the biggest keyword, or one of the biggest keywords, except for the environmental protection in our project, was Via Carpathia, right? So this singular project is very much welcome and contested by different stakeholders because it links Poland, which is growing dynamically, needs a lot of people on the labor market, and another big economy which has very big domestic potential of Romania, but then it transits Hungary and Slovakia. And these two larger economies and larger populations will possibly collaborate together because Polish and Romanian economies are very, I would say, yeah, it could be interconnected very well, but what is the profit of Slovakian and Hungarian regions that will just face transit, right? They also need to have some kind of added value. Like you said, localities need to participate in the growth generated by the overall strategy. So how do we do it? Can we maybe introduce cooperatives, but then again, how they work out with the national law? Can we maybe organize some strategic alliances that are maybe less formal? Maybe we can introduce an economic format. Maybe we can introduce an economic network or an industry board. I think these are the solutions that could be driven both by governance or political science related research, but also by the local players, including then companies, including NGOs, not only the local authorities, but including social and economical players. Yeah.
Thank you. I think you're touching on many of the complexities of macro-regional cooperation. We want critical mass, we want visibility. At the same time, there is a need for tailor-made solution. Where do you find a balance? How can you combine those? You need to then bring together countries with different interests. Then maybe the evidence needed is to monitor where are the benefits, how is the economic, the social benefit spread, and that's a starting point for discussion then. Is it fair, not fair? Not for us to judge, but at least for policymakers to know, and then getting robust evidence on what are the economic dynamics and how is that, what are the diffusion effects, how is that organized. So I think what you're saying is framing quite well how we can think the production of evidence to inform these policies. Alexandre, I finish then with you on the same topic of allowing us as applied researchers to inform concrete policy processes at different levels, from the local up to national or transnational. Do you see the starting point? Is it already, are the structures there? Do they need to be fine-tuned for us to be able to really help?
Well, I will divide the question in two topics. I would start with the need for evidence. This is even more pressing now than in the past, for two simple reasons. Usually we are, in our analysis, myopic, in the sense that we have a difficulty in seeing the trend that is coming by. And I'll give you an example. You meet a friend every day, you cannot see that he's becoming fatter or older. You see him 5 years after, and you can see the difference. So sometimes we need to be confronted with the reality, because we are so entangled with our own ecosystem that we don't see that the world is changing. And this is why evidence is important, because evidence is factual, it's cruel, it's that, and adds transparency and reality to the analysis between the dream or the political dream or the endeavor and what is happening. And this is why when you look at strategies are very beautiful, but we are still in development traps in many places. So this is the first topic. The second issue relates to institutions. If they have already this level to actually participate in this process. And I fear that most of them don't have. Not that they don't have the skills, but the fact that they don't have the commitment and the mandate to actively participate in this. And they are so pressured by their everyday business that they don't have time to anticipate and prepare the future. We are reactive by nature in terms of our organizational and political landscape. And because we are reactive, it's very hard to integrate information that most of you have been producing for many years and actually making it happen in the territory. And I think that these two realities add to a complexity or an added complexity governance framework where we need as Katarzyna was saying, we need to mobilize everybody. But to mobilize, we need to build trust. We need to have the data to show people, look, I'm older, but you are also older. So it doesn't matter if I'm dying because you will die as well. So we need to find a solution together. And this solution is actually much more multidimensional and composite than we think. Our problems have become increasingly complex, which means that the answer needs to be more complex as well and more complete. And when we look at the institutional framework, not only the issue of the polycentric governance, but also in terms of the capacities of these institutions to listen and to mobilize stakeholders is actually very important. And unfortunately, look at the divide that exists between society and political level, because this divide is very visible in many countries. So if there is a divide, somehow people and the actors, they become independent players in a game set that we are all supposed to participate. And so it's everyone for themselves. And this, in the end, does not work. It's badly played for everybody. Because of this divide, we have failed as policymakers to mobilize stakeholders, but also to make them accountable, because when we fail, everybody is failing. When institutions are failing, the society is failing. It's not just the guy running the the institution or the prime minister. Everybody is failing. And so we need to realize that we're all on the same boat, which is a very Atlantical language. We're all on the same boat, and either we start working together and find ways of coordinating, or we are going nowhere. And finally, navigation language gives you a very interesting perspective on this. This is like rowing a boat. If the guy on the left is not coordinated with the guy on the right, you are always on the same place. And this is what's happening to Europe, across Europe. And this is what new geographies, new ways of thinking are necessary. We need to evolve in the way we do policy. We need to evolve in the way we implement policy. We need to evolve in the way we instigate broad participation of everybody. This is a challenge for all of us. This is our collective mission as a whole. And this collective mission has lots of larger macro-regional mission, but also shared local agendas where we need to make people believe that the European model is the model to go, and it will be together in this collective construction where collective intelligence that is provided by this data is quite relevant. It is in this collective ensemble that we can actually redesign our future.
Thank you very much, Alexandre, for reframing discussions in this way, bringing back trust, bringing back collective action to the core. And this is also something we can contribute with, emphasizing the good practices, showing what works, sharing these practices, and showing then how the macro-regional level can be a vector of dissemination of these, of diffusion of what works, and how you reestablish trust, how you refine the notion of where are public policies needed, how do they best add up to what is happening in societies, in the business environment, and then fine-tuning the policy responses. So you added a very nice rounding to all this discussion, so thank you very much for that. I think we will take a technical break now for a few minutes, so until 11:45, and then we come back with a discussion with our stakeholders, so we get the other perspective from the more policy-making side on their take. They have been listening to discussions so far, so they will maybe have reflections immediately on what we've been saying now from a research perspective. Thank you very much to all of you for your precious inputs. I thought this discussion was very productive in terms of bringing clarity on notions, on what importance, on how these things are interlinked. I hope the audience also found so. Please don't hesitate now during the break also to share your reflections on what you've heard so far. Was it clear? Do you need other things? Should we get back to some aspects? Or do you have general reflections on what was said? The Slido is there for you, so please use it to express yourselves. And so for the time being, thank you very much. And we see each other in 45 minutes to the rest of the audience. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone, and welcome to the second session on new geographies. We're focusing still on our 3 macro-regional strategies or areas, respectively in the Alpine region, the Atlantic region, and the Carpathian region. We now have the pleasure of welcoming stakeholders from these 3 areas, which I will introduce to you in just a second. And we will then discuss with them governance and cooperation solutions for these areas. We'll look at good practices. We'll look at evidence needs, which we already discussed this morning. So I hope we can get back to the reflections on how to produce evidence that effectively can inform their policy processes. And we will be looking at future actions that can help improve and enhance territorial cooperation, governance arrangement, help build more resilient areas, reflecting around these multi-level governance arrangements that can be developed around the notion of new geographies, of functional areas, building on the notion of polycentric governance, which was addressed this morning. So we'll get back to all the notions now with a different perspectives from really the stakeholders. As previously, we have a Slido. You will see it appearing on the screen right now. And you can then, as I said earlier today, use it either by just focusing your smartphone on this QR code or going into the slido.com website and just type ESPON after the hashtag, and you will be able then to submit your questions or comments. So please use it actively. You're also free to vote on any questions or comments that are raised to emphasize that you think that they are particularly relevant. As I mentioned, we are joined by 3 stakeholders, and I now have the pleasure of introducing them. We have Justyna Rog, who is Deputy Director at the Marshal's Office of Podkarpackia region in Poland, with responsibility for international cooperation. Welcome to you. For the last 6 years, you have been running the Secretariat for the Carpathian Interregional Group at the European Committee of the Regions. You're a linguist by education and passion. And I also learned from your bio that you are a supervisor of the European Volleyball Confederation at the European Cup matches. So welcome.
Thank you very much.
We're also joined by Elise Vatrelot. Welcome to you. Thank you. You are Executive Secretary of the CPMR Atlantic Commission since 2020. You also lead the key network of 13 Atlantic regions as such, and you work to advance regional cooperation on maritime policy, climate, energy, and innovation. You have a big background in EU affairs, public policy, and regional advocacy. You bring both deep expertise and passion on strengthening the voice of European regions, and we are very pleased to have you with us today. Finally, Thomas Miklavčić. Did I pronounce that right?
That's right.
Right. You are a leading expert on spatial development in Slovenia, and you're based in the Slovenian Ministry of Natural Resources and Spatial Planning. You've helped shape national strategies like Slovenia's Spatial Development Strategy 2050 and the National Housing Programme. You've also been deeply engaged in European cooperation through ESPON, URBACT, the Alpine Convention, and you recently led the working group within the Alpine Convention to prepare the 10th State of the Alps report, focusing on quality of life in the Alps, and we're very glad to have you with us today.
Thank you very much.
I will start with you on the Alpine region and your reflections now. We had a presentation earlier today by Professor Tobias Chiller with results from the Interalp project. What I'd like to learn more about now from a stakeholder perspective, what was the catalyst for a research project on this? How, as a stakeholder, why did you feel the need to initiate a project on interface areas around the Alps? And how do you think results from this project will be used in the spatial planning community of the Alpine region now and in the years to come? Thomas, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eric. Thank you for introducing me and also for inviting me here today. I was one of the, I was a member of stakeholder group. There was part of this research on the Interalp territories. The need for such research actually came out of a long-lasting collaboration between different stakeholders in the Alps in different frameworks. You have mentioned the Alpine Convention. There's also the EUSALP and the Alpine space programs and so on. There's a lot of cooperation going on. And then there's also, we have this effort to prepare what we call a common spatial development perspective of the Alps. So to have a kind of a common document with a vision, with some objectives for the future development that we actually want to bring in front. to make such a document, basically you need to understand very well, how the territory functions, what are the interlinkages of the territory, what are actually its characteristics, and what you also need to understand better. It's to understand better this very complex governance structure that actually is in the Alps. But I'm sure not only in the Alps, also in the other parts of Europe. Basically, we have all those overlapping structures, programs, initiatives, and so on. So actually, there are eight countries altogether. There are 8 countries altogether in the Alps, which are politically organized in a very different way. There are these big federal states. There are smaller, more centralistic states like Slovenia. There are also some of the countries are part of the EU. Some are not. It also adds to the complexity of the structure. There's also many of these programs that are actually working in the Alps, and there are also international treaties that are present in the Alps. And one of these, and I have to mention it, of course, is the Alpine Convention, as being the key international contract addressing the protection of the Alps. And with its protocols, actually, it's balancing the protection of the Alps and its development, and it also stipulates the need to support the economic base of the residents in the Alps, to support the foundations of the living conditions of the Alpine inhabitants in a sustainable way. And then, as I said, these numerous cross-border international cooperation structures also at the end brought us to the point where in 2015 the European Council has endorsed the EU strategy for the Alpine region as one of the European macro-regional strategies. Another important player I want to mention here, because it's also important in the sense of providing the evidence, providing funding for different projects, is the Interreg Alpine Space program that also is a very important, let's say, actor in this multilateral settings that we have in the Alps. And then, of course, there are regions, and there are also municipalities that, in particular in spatial planning, have a lot of say and have a lot of competence. So basically, the Alps are very diverse. But also in the more the geographical sense of view, the Alps are also very diverse. They're not only the biodiversity hotspot of Europe and water tower of Europe and so on, but they're also very diverse when it comes to the sense of demographic development. The trends are very different in different parts of the Alps, and we're not always sure why this is so. Also, economic development, it's different. Then the traffic situation might be different, and so on. And to understand all this, of course, we need to have the territorial evidence. And for this reason, actually, we are applying also as a stakeholders who are meeting together in different frames. We are applying for this kind of projects. But as I said, the final goal is to develop these common perspectives for the common perspectives for the Alps. There were quite some studies done already. This one is not the first one. It's not the last one. But there were very few who actually were started and who were actually done with this aim of supporting the preparation of these perspectives. One that I have to mention is also the ESPON project from the previous program, Alps 2050. That project also brought in, it proposed some scenarios for the future development of the Alps. Another important study that actually was done, or it's actually the report on the Alpine towns. This is the 9th report on the state of the Alps that was prepared under the Swiss presidency of the Alpine Convention, and that report very much brought into forward the importance of these small Alpine towns. I think that Tobias in the morning has said something about that, how these small towns would be having 5,000-10,000 inhabitants are important actually for the wider, especially in the core Alpine area, for the provision of the services and so on. And it's one important outcome of that report. There also were some studies were actually prepared as pave the way towards these perspectives. And in the last report, I also have to mention in the 10th report on the state of the Alps on the quality of life. I also hope that's going to be one of the major inputs for these perspectives, as it actually highlights what shapes the life of the Alpine residents, what is also important for them, what they are lacking, what they would need in order to maintain the quality of life that basically has been achieved. These reports on the state of the Alps are presented every 2 years in the frame of the Alpine Convention. And also this 10th report was partly supported by ESPON. Some studies were done by ESPON, and also methodology that we have used was prepared by ESPON. ESPON seems to be a very important player, a very important tool for us, the stakeholders, to gather this territorial information. Actually, it's quite convenient for us, and in particular, these targeted activities are very convenient because it actually allows us to address a very specific issue in a very efficient manner, and that, I mean, both administratively and also in the content-wise, and the results are usually of very high quality, and basically also because of our active collaboration in the process of preparing the study, we are really able to get out what we need or what we believe that actually we need. In this particular case of the interlinked Alpine interlinked territories, we as policymakers and also as planners, we wanted or we need to understand these interlinkages and flows between the core, more mountainous Alpine areas and the lowlands, so the peri-Alpine areas. These territories also serve as a cross-Alpine corridors that on one hand brings a lot of economical opportunities to the Alps, but on the other also causes all sorts of problems, like environmental problems, like noise pollution, land take, and so on. So there's some problems always adjoined with some economical opportunities. Yeah, and among these core areas and among these the more flat, the peri-Alpine areas, there are very, very strong flows of people. There are very strong flows of good, and there is also a dependence on each other. There also these flows are not one way only. They're also not only from the core to the edge of the Alps, but also in the other way. The Alps are very important. Sometimes say the playground, for the residents of the more urbanized areas around. They're very important in the sense of providing all sorts of ecosystem services. The Alps are the water pillar of Europe. They're also important in the sense of the tourism and the recreational opportunities and so on. And we wanted to understand this a bit more in this very specific, let's say, the functional geography of interlinked territories. And we have asked quite some questions actually to the experts. So we wanted to understand better the role of the green and blue infrastructure. We want to understand better, how the energy production, storage, and transport are organized, and how they impact the territory. Then I mentioned before the transport infrastructure is very important and brings all sorts of opportunities, but also brings all sorts of problems and to the residents. And of course, there are these demographic interlinkages between the two areas. There are different in and out migration flows that again are not only one way. We have also a lot of secondary homes and that are in the Alps, and people moving from the urbanized areas to the core Alpine area. So there are all sorts of different flows that we need to tackle and we need to understand. And what I also would like maybe to highlight is that this research project actually collected all sorts of information that are, of course, of a very big value for us. But to go to the usability of the results, but I think it's also important that they had zoomed into this, what we call the pilot areas, of the concrete interlinked territories, or interface territories. So making these results more useful also on the regional and even on the local level. ESPON many research projects, of course, bring a lot of knowledge, a lot of good information, but they're more this kind of strategic level. And it's very hard then to translate them or to zoom them into the concrete territories. But this project did that. And I think that's another added value of this. And now I came to your question on the how the results are going to be used. I'm very convinced that we are going to make a good and a great use of this Interalp results in the planning communities on a very different level. On the pan-Alpine level, of course, this is the important input for this Interalp project. That was also the main motivation why actually we have asked this for this project. Well, the process of preparing the perspectives is actually stemmed by the Alpine Convention. There is a working group on the spatial planning and sustainable development that is running this very important process, also involving other stakeholders in. And I think in 3 or 4 years we are supposed to come to the point in history and just say now we have common perspectives for the Alps, so a document that will bring bring the vision for this Alpine development, but also some recommendations, for the lower levels of especially in planning for regions, for national states, for the municipalities, what to do in order to follow kind of a common vision of the Alps. I have mentioned before this pilot areas, and now I would like also to show just a few maps that I have actually prepared. It's our Slovenian case. Do I have the PowerPoint? I have prepared 3. Yeah, no, I go one slide back. Well, yeah, in Slovenia at the moment we are in the process of preparing the 4th generation of regional spatial plans. So until now we only have spatial planning on the national level, and this map that actually you have seen now on the screen, these are the images from the national spatial planning strategy. The one on your left actually shows our territorial development concept. And then beside this national level, we also have the municipal level that is actually more concrete, and it's more about the land use planning and so on. But we were missing this intermediate level that now we are trying to introduce. And as you can see on this map on the left side, there basically there are these kind of orange parts that are marked there. This is what we call the wider urban areas. So these actually are functional urban areas, as they're also known in the European practice. And the one in the very center, the biggest spot in the center is Ljubljana, the capital city, and then this yellow spot that goes towards the left up corner of this map actually is this interlinked territory that is also that is also studied into the Interalp report. So it's the area of Ljubljana and the Julian Alps. In our national spatial strategy, we recognize that there are 2 overlapping functional urban areas, one of the capital city, and there is one smaller of the city of Kranj that is the smaller dot that also is in there. And in our regional plans, this area is going to be addressed or planned in 2 different plans, because we don't have a common region that would prepare one plan, but actually there are 2 statistical regions. So in this perspective on the national level, we're going to cut it in 2. And here I think it's important to have this Interalp study, because it really shows that how these areas do interlink. And what I would like to do, and we also have another ESPON event in Slovenia in September on that, we'd really like to introduce these ESPON results to the stakeholders, to those who actually are preparing the plan, who are working on it, who are drafting it, to try really to overcome this administrative burden that actually we have in our planning system. And this map also here shows this governance, let's say, landscape of the area with all different national authorities and also cross-border and so on. And just to finish with There are also there are two maps that also illustrates what I said before. The one on the right actually is from the Interalp project, so it's this Juline's Ljubljana area, and the one on the left. That those of you who might have a sharp eye will see are missing the capital city, missing the lower part of the map. It's from one of our national study that we have actually done to prepare this regional plan. This picture on the left shows actually the urban we call it urban model of the area. And if you look at the bottom of that picture, you see there are no interlinkages to the capital city, but that actually are there. And here basically this ESPON study somehow is, in our case, interregional study that really shows us the importance of also having a look on a different type of geography. We call it a new geography, but it's, let's say, a functional geography of the area. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you very much. I think your presentation very nicely illustrates how the ESPON program can answer specific knowledge needs. You talked about now new geographies, you talked about specific questions on green infrastructure, on energy storage, on transport, concrete needs that somehow has to be in front to provide this type of evidence to create the conditions for an evidence-informed discussion, especially in a context where we know that many political developments go in direction of less evidence-informed and more ideology or types of approaches which can be very, well, the dialogue can be complex, and the importance of preserving a trust, of having a basis, evidence base for discussion is increasingly important, so making that robust. You mentioned, you want to comment, please.
Yeah, I want not to comment, but I think for me it's important that we have a process. And so when in a process you came to a certain question, it's very good if you have someone you can ask to. Okay. And in this respect, these studies are really, as I said, very, very convenient for us, because we can ask very specific question, and quite quickly we can actually get the answer to it, and then we can use this evidence. And then, of course, in policymaking, on one hand, it's important to have evidence. Here, I think we are all convinced that the policymaking has to be evidence-based and so on. But it's also true that more evidence you have, more knowledge you have, harder you make a decision. So it's like, that's why I think it's important to have a process. And also, if you have then stakeholders on board with you, we learn and we grow together. And then it's sometimes then changes do happen in the process itself. Maybe it's not even that important to have at the end a paper whatsoever, but it's important that you have the right stakeholders on board all the time.
Excellent. It's nice. We talked about this morning more maybe as something to be addressed, but you say it's actually functioning. You have a process. ESPON has been able to answer, to provide elements resulting from that process. I'll be then very interested to hear from the Alpine and from the Atlantic and Carpathian regions if you feel you have the same processes. Maybe there is a room for sharing of good practices there. But it's very nice to say that from your perspective, things are already functioning. There are things in place. And ESPON is a component of the answer to that issue. So that's very nice. I also liked the way you mentioned the example of the small towns and their importance. And I imagine having this as an Alpine project creates a legitimacy and say, these towns are important. It's not just a small Slovenian issue, it's not an Austrian issue, it's an Alpine issue. And not only does that create legitimacy for the local actors to say, we are important, we are 5,000 inhabitants, but you need to focus on our needs. But also to tell the European Commission or the European bodies, these small towns, you need to make sure that these policies preserve these towns, otherwise we have an issue. And we say that not as I said, one Slovenian or one Austrian town, we say it as the Alps, and that creates another weight.
Yeah, that's a very important result. I was very glad that we actually got that result and we got that information. I'm working a lot on the spatial planning on the national level, like very strategically. And we all the time we are hearing that Slovenia is a very centralized country, that everything is in the capital city, everything is moving there, jobs are there, and so on, and functions are there. And we're all the time arguing, yeah, of course, there's this process going on. But if you want to, let's say, to moderate this process, not to stop it, but maybe to moderate it, we have to give a lot of support to these small towns that they have that their role actually is to provide services also for the countryside. So But quite often we hear that now if we want to keep the countryside to the rural areas populated, we need to invest sort of into rural areas. Of course, we have to invest there to a certain extent, but these small urban nodes are even of greatest importance, because if you lose those small urban nodes, people will just move to the bigger city. They just have to jump over, one territorial structure. I think the results of this project are quite important. As you said, also, yeah, as a message towards the EU, towards the cohesion policy, how it should be designed, what it should support, and so on. But it's also a great argument for us on the national level. When you're actually talking to either to planners or to politicians or to other policymakers and so on.
Excellent. So we have a concrete example of a macro-regional added value in planning processes and its different implications. Thank you very much for that. It's time to move on. I'd like to hear more from the Atlantic region. So I move on to our speaker, Elise Vatrelot. I'd like to hear more about why. Why do decision makers in the Atlantic area promote the idea of a macro-regional strategy? What do they expect from it? Is it maybe something similar from the Alpine? Is it different from the Alpine region? And how is this related to new geographies? We talked in more the new geographies, the development, the responses to emerging trends, this notion of non-standard functional areas, new ways of thinking interrelations. What role does that play in these processes? And once again, if you can get back to what evidence do you need? So do you have the same very positive impressions as was presented to us just now for the Alpine, or do you see really a need to establish something, establish processes, and establish a dialogue with applied research organizations such as ESPON? Elise, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eric, and thank you to ESPON for this very nice event, and also to hear from other geographies. It's very interesting also in our case in the Atlantic. So perhaps to answer your question, let me bring you back to 1989. I know it sounds a little bit strange, but I do think it's interesting to see the political process behind, and that brings us back actually to 1989, when the Atlantic Arc Commission of the CPMR was created. So basically 23 regions came together. Thank you very much. Came together to create the Atlantic Arc Commission. It was done out of political will, especially from the president of regions Pays de la Loire and Brittany. And they had the feeling that it would be better for the Atlantic regions to come together in view of EU integration, of course, but also because they had the knowledge that, of course, the economic growth was more at the center of Europe, the blue banana to which Alexander earlier referred to. And so they decided to create this association to counter a little bit this peripherality that the Atlantic Arc was knowing back at the time. And so it's important to see that there was a political will also initiating this joint association in the Atlantic Arc. What is interesting also is that they had a feeling of a common heritage, although it's diverse in the Atlantic. They felt that they had an history in common that was backing a little bit this idea of joining forces to develop the Atlantic Arc. Of course, it is, well, the Celtic legacy, the migration routes to America, the trades in the Atlantic, the maritime prosperity of the 15th, 18th century. And this is important to quote. It sounds a little bit anecdotic, but it's very important to explain a little bit the trust that has been built also between those Atlantic regions and how it was supported by a political narrative. And back at the time, actually, the politicians, they had a project, they had a funding objectives that can be summarized as such. So first, creating solidarities between Atlantic regions, developing transport, communication infrastructure around the Atlantic Arc, supporting regional development. Also, a very interesting objective that I rediscovered is the developing flagship industrial projects. I think it's very much echoing the current discussion we have at EU level. building up networks of Atlantic research and academic institutions, promoting touristic assets, and developing environmental protection and measures for an attractive living environment. So this was a little bit the initiating an integrated vision of the development in the Atlantic Arc Commission, and this was followed actually by many other, creation of many other associations in the Atlantic cities, Atlantic Economic and Social Committees, more recently Atlantic Chambers of Commerce. We had also new European framework to develop such cooperation, Interreg Atlantic area, and also the Atlantic Maritime Strategy, that is this intergovernmental strategy between the four EU Atlantic member states. So it brought really much a lot of cooperation framework and solidarities actually at the Atlantic scale. On the two maps that you can see on the screen, it's our map, our association, so the map in 2024. So it's our member regions, and on the side is the Interreg Atlantic area and the regions that it encompasses. And I thought it's good because sometimes, good to show you that, because sometimes we don't necessarily understand or think what is the Atlantic area. It's a very vast geography. And so to answer your question also on what now is relevant for us and why we've applied to this ESPON analysis is that we thought that, of course, we have remaining challenges in the Atlantic Arc Commission that our regions and our regional politicians feel we need to, still work on it. And we have also a new context. And that's a little bit different from 1989. The new context is, of course, the withdrawal of the UK from the EU, the double impact we had with COVID-19 crisis on the Atlantic regions. We have also, the shift in global alliances that is also affecting local resilience. And all in all, there was a feeling, and actually a couple of years ago, to have a rebirth of this integrated vision of Atlantic development. How to go a little bit further than what exists, and how to really coordinate efforts in that respect. So I can share, I think it's this button. Sorry if I'm not using it properly. Okay, thank you very much. So now there is also the green transition. This is very, very important challenge, and that's creating, of course, new solidarities, new challenges to tackle together. Just wanted to show you this first map on the left-hand side. It's the hydrogen station in Europe. You can see they are very much focused in the center of Europe. And so back at the time, regional politicians thought, well, this is not normal. This is also preventing the Atlantic from new opportunities linked to the green transition. So we have to do something together, actually, to counter this reality. And of course, hydrogen, as you know, so that it is economically viable, you have to produce a lot of hydrogen, you have to multiply the uses. So their cooperation is an interesting thing to do in the Atlantic, also because we have specificities, maritime industries that can use green hydrogen for their own functioning. So that's a little bit where we can see that the former objective can be translating into current realities. We also have, and probably Alexander also mentioned that to you this morning, but very uneven socioeconomic developments in the Atlantic. So we have different driving regions, but also less developed regions in the Atlantic. And there was a feeling that joining forces in the Atlantic could sort this out and try to create value chains also across the Atlantic that share many commonalities in terms of sectors, industries, and specializations. Oops, I'm gonna pass the slide. Thank you. Also, the connections, that's something we discussed back in 1989. There was a sensation that the Atlantic came together because of a certain peripherality. So the Atlantic transport connection is still a challenge for us. They are, of course, more connected regions now, but it needs to still be improved to support attractivity and economic development in the Atlantic. As you can see, mostly the Atlantic corridor is connecting the capitals. It has improved throughout time to connect the metropoles in the coastal areas, but still there are some work to do in that respect. And so the ESPON analysis is also a very nice exercise to actually go further than just the European maps on Atlantic corridors, but also give a sense of connectivity in the Atlantic area and how joint efforts could solve that. And let me also go back to existing framework. They have built trust through time, which is very important. But the regional politicians, they might have felt a lack of integration between those different frameworks. Although it's done in the current on the day-to-day basis, there are interactions between those frameworks, between the Atlantic Maritime Strategy and Interreg, and also and also with us, the Atlantic Arc Commission. But still, there is a sensation that we could go a little bit further in the level of integration to have an integrated vision of the Atlantic territory. So that's a little bit where we come from with the ESPON analysis. And what is also interesting with this exercise is that it brought not only the Atlantic regions together on a specific study, but also other economic and social stakeholders in the Atlantic, because we associated with Atlantic cities, in the steering committee of this ESPON analysis, with the Atlantic Economic and Social Committees, with regions that are participating directly also in the steering committee. So it's very much of a bottom-up approach also. So the idea was also to come together with this analysis, and so it has helped us a lot actually to, as you said, Thomas, grow together in having a shared vision of what is the Atlantic development.
Excellent, thank you very much. We see then emerging that you have processes emerging then in this process in interaction with the ESPON project actually of what is the evidence need. How can it be responded? Do you feel then that you're starting to has it changed the way the dialogue is running? Does this evidence, do you see the needs for more? What is the state currently? Well, what is the state of mind? You've now a starting point to actually establish something operational, or you already have something that you feel is bringing you into a more operational, coming up with solutions basically to your challenges? What's the state of play?
No, definitely. We have, so there is two levels. There is a political, let's say, political work. It has helped us a lot to discuss the topic all together, to share the same vision. It has helped us also in the way we interact with the member states and also the European Commission, because it brings data and really formal data to specific challenges of the Atlantic. So in that way, it has helped us. And it has helped us also very concretely in the sense that regions, they have started to talk together about, so then what we need to do, if the macro region exists or not, what are the concrete steps we can take all together to answer the specific challenges that were identified in the ESPON analysis. And for example, we have currently a reflection on how to align funding at different levels. So regions, they are starting to understand what kind of mechanism could work to perhaps align funding on flagship project that they would share together. They would feel that it's relevant for them and for the other. That's an example of a concrete step that we are doing. whether the macro-region in the end is officialized at EU level. There is a level of integration that can be done already by the stakeholders.
Thank you. That's another interesting perspective on how you build critical mass. So basically, the Alpine level gives a critical mass for reflections on alignment, and then maybe methodological approaches that would be applied in individual area and gain legitimacy from being the product of a transnational reflection. Thank you. We will have a final round of discussion, so I hope questions are now coming into the Slido, and we will be getting back to those at the end, so we can go back to each of the regions, depending on the questions that arise from the audience. But for the time being, we move back to the other side of Europe, to the Carpathian. Justina, if you could also introduce us to the justification of, I have a bit of the same questions as for the Atlantic. What is driving this idea of macro-regional strategy? How is it related to functional areas, and what evidence do you need? So could you please share your reflections on these topics also from the Carpathian perspective? Justina, please.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Thank you for organizing this excellent event. When I saw the title of the conference, of the event, I thought that I am maybe in the right place because I'm going to speak about something new. Maybe not completely new because initiative has a long story, but we don't have legal frames for Carpathian strategy. So Carpathian strategy, Carpathian mountains are the second largest mountain range in Europe, of course after the Alps, and covering 190,000 square kilometers. The diversity of management systems and traditions is evident in this area because it covers European states, from European regions from Poland, from Slovakia, Czech Republic, Romania, and Hungary, as well as non-European regions as Moldova, Serbia, and Ukraine. So it seems like regions are under the jurisdiction of many countries. And this area is a home for 57 million people due to, in large scale, to the location of big centers in the foot of the mountains, as for example Budapest, Bucharest, and Bratislava. However, it should be noted that it is a home for a wide population. And we are also facing a big problem of ongoing the population process because people are leaving remote areas, especially young people, and we need to find some solution, find some way how to convince them to stay. Another problem is that Carpathian countries show significant differences in economic development as measured by GDP per capita. The main dimension of these differences is the west-east axis, followed by the north-south axis. The low level of development in the macro-region was particularly evident in relation to European average. The level of development in some region measured by purchasing power parity was less than 10%, and the large majority of the regions doesn't exceed 50%. So it's very low. When we compare it with Alps, the difference is very huge. And it is also worth noting gaps in technical and communication infrastructure, which require further support and investments. Then from social perspective, transportation is crucial to people mobility and access to basic services as education, healthcare, and culture. For example, in my region, in Podkarpackie region, in the south part of Poland, many elderly people living in small villages in mountains face big problems during the winter when they get sick and they need to call ambulance. It's sometimes it's not possible to reach them in the right time, in the right moment. And however, we cannot forget about unique nature and our duty to protect it. The Carpathian Mountains cover a wide range of habitats and are considered to be one of the key hotspots of biodiversity in the whole continent. And the region is home for many animal populations and also includes significant areas of natural forest. Some of the forests survive until now, until modern times, without human interference, which are important sites for water retention. And I think that a key element to create functional area, functional region, is bottom-up activity. And bottom-up activity is evident in Carpathian region by many initiatives because local communities, local residents know best what challenges they face, what problems they have. And it's also important to have support of local authorities and to have their understanding because sometimes local authorities can disturb them because they would like to locate European funds in the centers of regions instead to put them in more rural areas. Then overcoming barriers will be possible only through joint activities, approaches, and extend beyond administrative borders to strengthen the area as a living place for a people with economically and socially sustainable initiative. The good example is existing Carpathian Convention that organize many initiatives dedicated for nature, then for environment protection, and we cannot forget about Green Deal. We need to think about going forward, about applying new initiatives, but we cannot forget about protection of the environment. In conclusion, I think that recognition of the Carpathian macro-region as a functional region with a territorial identity is essential because it will help to protect natural resources and to support local communities while taking advantage of its unique assets, right? And about the results, I think that we have to use them in the framework of existing forms of cooperations, as mentioned Carpathian Convention, because it is a good example of a multi-sectoral governance approach that allows multi-political integration under the framework. And Carpathian Convention work on thematic protocols, thematic activities, for example, protocol on the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity and landscapes, protocol on sustainable tourism. We would like to also share analysis from the project with all stakeholders that are engaged in the process of creation of the future macro-regional strategy for the Carpathians. And I would like to emphasize that the Carpat project is a unique one. And before, we didn't have such a project that based on the data from EU countries as well as from the non-EU countries. and this is very important. Our stakeholders in ongoing ESPON projects were Maramureș County Council from Romania, Suceava County Council from Romania, and Prešov from Slovakia. And as an observer, we had Ministry for Regional Funds and Regional Development from Serbia. So they also promised to share analysis with all stakeholders in their countries. Because as you mentioned, Eric, I also work for the Interregional Carpathian group within the European Committee of the Regions, and we are also discussing now how we can use results. And on the next Carpathian group meeting, we will try to find a good way to share it with local communities in our countries, because, as you mentioned, evidence. This is what people ask. This is what habitants ask. What we will get, how our life quality will improve. And we also plan more bottom-up activities. Now, as we have those results, we hope to make it in the better way, to get more impact from the people. And we would like to also create more strategic documents dedicated for the future Carpathian strategy. In 2019, European Committee of the Regions adopted opinion on the macro-regional strategy for the Carpathian region. It was the first official document that mentioned Carpathian strategy. And then we had COVID. We cannot forget also about war in Ukraine. My region is bordering with Ukraine. But in this context, the future Carpathian strategy can also help in the future reconstruction of the Ukraine, because everything has to be rebuilt in Ukraine. Institutions, schools, then natural resources. We need legal framework to protect it and to undertake joint initiatives to do it. And to do it, we need a common agreement of whole Carpathian member states, and then to get acceptance of the European Union. And I hope it will come soon. And I hope that governments of whole European countries will understand needs of the people living in remote areas, and our voice will be heard.
Thank you very much. I think you provide very nice illustration of how the Carpathian, very nice first to see how the Carpathian is gaining momentum. Carpathian cooperation is gaining momentum. What I'm wondering, we talked about this morning about functional areas being about supporting through evidence a policy project. And we've heard exciting projects for Carpathian. We talked about the Carpathian Natural Park, maybe a transnational nature protection driven by politically, well, by the usefulness in terms of its in political processes. Maybe it adds another legitimacy, another energy to nature protection to make it transnational. This is the ideas we met. Then what is the evidence that would be needed to support such a project? We know also that in the Carpathians you have an extensive industrial tradition, but industries, many of which are maybe struggling. They need to become more competitive, more innovative. And this is a transformation. You need to then access the skills, develop the skills, develop access to research environments, new functional areas, new functional geographies of industries in the Carpathian, building on natural resources with a green digital perspective. I'm just wondering, we talked about the critical mass of the macro-regional cooperation, the added value of the macro-regional level. Do you see this already in the Carpathian, a critical mass in renewing reflections on how can nature protection be organized more effectively? How can we think of industrial transitions with taking on board the specificities of the Carpathian mountain lowland context? Do you see that already, the starting point for this? And then do you see how this could lead into maybe even more specific requests for follow-up evidence to inform discussions on key topics such as those?
Thank you for this question. So I'm sure that we are ready to face those problems because, as I mentioned, many young people are living remote areas and going to the centers, to big cities to study. And then we need to find a way to make them come back to remote areas and to prove habitants how they can face challenges and at the same time do not harm nature, because elderly people are very scared about harming nature and about losing their identity. Also in my region, we are now working on the hydrogen centers that are located also in the mountains. And with European Union help, assistance, we know how to do it without harming nature and at the same time to helping nature facing common problems, because we have pollution. We are facing every year problems with water because there's a lack of water. So we need to move forward, but we need some help and legal frames to do it, because our initiatives are, as regions, as local authorities, are good, but are not enough.
If I may, this is a great linking point to one of the questions from the audience about, you talk about getting the financial support, maybe the regulatory frameworks. Do you see in the next programming period the flexibility coming up to address? You have the processes leading to either concrete projects or very clear identification of needs. But do you then feel that you have the frameworks, EU, national, that will allow you to implement solutions that are fitted to not only the need itself, but the way the governance context around the needs? Katarzyna, maybe if you want to start, and we'll go around on this topic, which I think interests everyone.
So the frameworks, as we have for now, are not enough for the Carpathian communities, because we need some tailor-made solutions. When we speak about unique resources, about cultural heritage, we cannot close it in the framework of one region. We have development strategy, for example, for Podkarpacki region, but we cannot cover the cross-border part. There are so many challenges and so many borders that we need to take into account, and without having one framework that will work for whole macro region, we cannot fully understand and face needs of local communities. As my colleague said, this framework as macro region helps a lot. Helps a lot to integrate communities, but also from the financial point of view. So I think that Carpathian strategy, macro-regional strategy for the Carpathian, is needed.
Thank you. Elise, your reflections on frameworks and future of cohesion policy post-2027, and whether it needs to be rethought to align with what you see as needs and possibilities.
Yeah, very interesting question, very, very deep as well. There are two things. For the current programming period, I think what we've seen is that we need to align fundings to specific projects so that they have impacts also. And of course, cohesion policy is a very interesting tool because it's a place-based approach, place-based investment. So for us, cohesion policy is very dear to our heart, and at CPMO level, we are defending a cohesion policy that involves regional authorities in the strategic thinking and the implementation. That's a very important message we try to share with the EU institutions. But there are also the directly managed funding that are also an important source of funding. And sometimes we've seen that they might have lacked territorial awareness, how they are spread across Europe. This morning, Alexander showed a map of Horizon project. They were concentrated on Central Europe. So I think there is also reflection to have on the territoriality of this directly managed funding that should be complementary actually to the investments made through cohesion policy. Now, with the negotiations that will start on a new multi-annual financial framework for the EU and reflection around the future of cohesion policy, I think this exercise made by ESPON and our exercise also to gather forces at the Atlantic level is very crucial in terms of timing. We need to have a clear view on where we are going, also to make sure that we can also influence the future funds and how they are built, so that also we can include some mechanisms to better streamline funding. So that's also very important to have that now. You talked about momentum for the Carpathian. I think it's a momentum for different geographies also in that respect. And yes, of course, so that would be my answer, like how is it now, and the influence we can have on the future cohesion policy and other programs. We have seen the discussion around national plans as well as a way to structure the investment at EU level. This is something we are a little bit worried about in terms of awareness of the territorial challenge. But I mean, we are here also to think through on what would be the best solution for territories.
Thank you. Thomas, do you have also reflections on the needs for possible more flexibility in cohesion policy, or do you think current frameworks can actually offer the sufficient solutions?
I don't really know if I have the right answer to that. Maybe to these frameworks, there are so many, and each of them actually adds a little bit of complexity to the entire picture. So I think also it's very hard for those who are actually doing programming and so on. It's basically very hard to address all that, because quite often, although we have the similar objectives, the details are a bit different, and that's why I think we so often we are discussing that these policies maybe they're territorially blind and so on. But it's also because there are so many different objectives and frameworks, and sometimes that's why I see maybe I see this added value of this Alpine perspectives, as having a kind of a joint document. Basically, it might also be cross-sector and try to guide a little bit more, everyone who is basically doing something in the area, from those who are actually programming the cohesion policy, or from the national authorities and so on.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, a big part of the solution is also just informing all actors involved and getting them a bit in the same direction, pulling in the same direction more, and then they may be able to use tools in a more effective way. I
said before, for me, this process is very important. I think that basically we'll never be completely satisfied with the result, and we always say that we're not following all the priorities that we have. We are not, place-based enough. I think we'll never get there, because if the one thing is true is that actually the territory is developing all the time. So also the objectives are changing all the time. So it's very hard to be at the right time, really, very concise and have the right instrument there.
Thank you. I'd like to close with we have one interesting question from the audience on identity and public mobilization, keeping the people in mind in this. This could not be a technical business project. It's about people living in their regions and feeling that they belong to an area, and that this is part also of their aspirations for the future, that they belong and they would like to see their home areas developing in a balanced, resilient way, etc. What roles do you say in that? Do you have any comments on this notion of how keeping the people in the macro region and then seeing what is the added value of a macro regional, huge, extensive territories, and also ensuring that the living environment of individuals are being preserved and developed. I don't know if you haven't done any concluding reflection on that, keeping the people in the loop in these and the identities. Is it already the case? Is that what it's driving this? That people are already feeling very Carpathian or Atlantic or Alpine? Or is it something else?
I strongly believe in public identity and mobilization because when we stop to believe in our roots, in our identities, there is no sense to move forward, to protect it. And it's beautiful that people still live in these remote areas, still protect their identity, their culture, sometimes the language, because we have many kind of different languages in Carpathians. It depends on the regions. And about public mobilizations, after 30 years of public initiatives, bottom-up activities in Carpathians, we still believe that there will arrive the right moment that European Union will hear our voice and will create macro-regional strategy for the Carpathians. We used to say that Alpine strategy is our older sister because the specificity is similar, because Alpine strategy is created for the mountain areas. And we are hoping and waiting for our momentum.
Great, thank you. I think those will be the concluding words today. I think we have three regions that all have this sense of being marginal, peripheral in some respects, at least inner Alps, having some kind of specific challenges. New geographies, functional areas are also a topic for metropolitan areas, for the most central ones. This is also then maybe an opening to a follow-up discussion to address this across Europe, and this is not a specific. We need to go from a discourse of specificity to a project for Europe that includes everyone, and that is broad enough, varied enough, allowing for the flexibility to actually adapt to a wide range of realities, of political projects, of aspirations, and bringing this into a coherent whole. But I think those will be the concluding words for today. Thank you very much for your inputs. Very enriching to see also your perspective, adding on to what we heard this morning from the researchers. Very nice to see how you've drawn benefits from what ESPON has produced, and see how that's concretely being then incorporated into the policy processes, and very much looking forward to seeing how this develops in the months and years to come. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the audience. Thank you for the questions. Very nice to have you with us. And I hope this was also an enriching and interesting experience for you. Thank you.